Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I heard the chime for the first time when I got home from a distant relative's funeral. It was late and I was in no mood for surprises. I had placed the wooden wind chime in my office because I didn't want it near my bedroom. My grandfather, the man who made it, died before I was born, so I never got the chance to see him at work. Mom always said he loved to build small gadgets. She still has some of his old drawings in a box somewhere. That night I was sitting on the couch in the living room feeling drained from the day, and out of nowhere I heard the chime ring. The sound was soft but distinct. I turned off the TV, listened, and heard it again. I thought maybe a window was open, but the house was sealed up tight. I walked to the office. The door was half open. When I pushed it fully, I noticed no breeze. Nothing that would make that wind chime move. I stood there for a while, waiting to see if it would ring again, but it stayed silent. My heart was beating fast, and I remember rubbing my palms together because they were sweaty. I turned on every light in the office, checked the corners, and waved my hand around the chime. It didn't swing, it didn't make a sound. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, or maybe something outside had bumped the wall. I turned off the lights, stepped out, and closed the door behind me. About an hour later, my phone rang. It was past midnight, and I saw my cousin's name on the screen. I braced myself because late-night calls rarely bring good news. When I answered, she told me our great-aunt, my grandfather's sister, had passed away earlier that night. I swallowed hard because I felt a strange knot in my stomach. The timing was too close to ignore. I glanced at the office door and felt an uneasy sweat trickle down my forehead. For the next few days, I didn't go near that wind chime. I kept the office door shut and tried to ignore it, but I found myself thinking about it whenever the house was quiet. I kept wondering if I'd hear it ring on its own again. I was working from home during that week, so I had a lot of time in the house. The slightest creak in the walls put me on edge. I'd pause my typing, take off my headphones, and listen. Each time I did that, the back of my neck felt tense. My mind kept going back to that first ring. It sounded too clean and purposeful to be random. I decided one afternoon to go into the office and look at the wind chime in plain daylight. It was on a small hook on the wall near the window. The chime itself looked simple, just a few wooden tubes and a small piece of wood in the center that could knock against them. I ran my fingertips over the tubes. They felt smooth, and they made a delicate click when they touched each other. The piece that held them together was just a small wooden ring. There was a bit of string, and it looked old but not frayed. I gave the chime a gentle push. It swayed and made a soft sound. Then I let it settle. I stood there for a full minute, watching for any movement. Nothing happened. I scanned the window frame. It was closed. No drafts of air were coming in. The house's air conditioning was on, but it wasn't blowing directly on the chime. I couldn't find any reason for it to move on its own. I felt a bit foolish, so I told myself to stop obsessing over it, but part of me still remembered the call I got that same night. It was too much of a coincidence for me. I decided to keep the chime where it was, but made sure the door stayed closed, especially at night. If it rang again, I didn't want to hear it. It wasn't even about being scared of a ghost or anything like that. I was just uncomfortable with the reminder of my grandfather and the weird timing with my great-aunt's passing. A few days later, Mom visited me to drop off some groceries she'd picked up. She asked if I still had Grandpa's old wind chime. I hesitated. "Yeah, it's in the office," I said. She told me Grandpa used to make all kinds of small wooden items. Then she asked if I'd heard it ring. I froze a bit because she said it so casually. I just told her I heard it once, but figured it was nothing. She smiled, looked at me, and said, "Your grandfather loved that piece. He said it brought him good luck." Then she changed the subject to something else. I was relieved she didn't press further, because I didn't want to explain the strange phone call or how I'd gotten goosebumps from a piece of wood. That night, I was alone, watching some random show in the living room. The office door was closed. Around 10 o'clock, I heard a dull clunk from behind that door. My body stiffened. I paused the TV again and listened. It didn't sound like a ring, more like a piece of wood knocking against the wall. I got up slowly, not sure if I should check it out or leave it alone. My feet felt heavy on the floor. My pulse was a bit faster than normal. I could feel sweat gathering at my temples. I walked up to the door. I placed my hand on the doorknob and took a breath. I twisted the knob and nudged the door open. The room was dark, so I reached for the light switch. The overhead light flickered on. I looked around. The wind chime was swaying slightly, like it had been touched or nudged. My eyes went to the window again, still closed. I checked the vents, none were pointed at the chime. I walked up to it and placed my hand on the wooden tubes, stopping them from moving. They came to a complete rest in my grasp. I stood there for maybe half a minute, listening to the sound of my own breathing. Nothing else moved. I let go and stepped back. It didn't make any more noise. The tension in my shoulders lessened, and I rubbed my arms because the air felt chilly. I left the room and shut the door, making sure to lock it this time. I never lock an interior door, but I did that night. The next day, I contacted a friend of mine who does basic home repairs. I asked him to come over and see if there was any reason the chime would move. He checked the insulation around the window and said it was fine. He looked at the air vents, found nothing unusual. He even tapped on the walls to see if there was some vibration from outside or from the central air system. Everything seemed normal. He shrugged and told me maybe the AC was making a small current. I thanked him and tried to act casual, but inside I felt a sense of unease. I didn't mention the phone call or the funeral. I didn't want to sound paranoid. That weekend I decided to put the wind chime in a box. I packed it in some newspaper, closed the box, and slid it into the closet in the hallway. I thought if it was out of sight, I would stop worrying about it. For the next several days, I didn't hear any strange sounds. I slept better. My office felt more comfortable. I even got more work done without constantly looking over my shoulder. It was a relief, and I started thinking maybe I'd just worked myself up after the funeral. But the following Friday, I was doing laundry, and I happened to open the closet in the hallway to grab a spare blanket. I saw that box sitting there. My stomach tightened a bit, but I tried to ignore that feeling. I grabbed the blanket, closed the closet, and went back to my laundry routine. Later that evening, I was getting ready for bed. While brushing my teeth, I heard a soft clink from the hallway. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a quick light sound like a piece of wood tapping. I turned off the faucet and listened. The hallway was dim. I glanced over, and the closet door was still closed. I turned on the hallway light. Everything looked normal. I told myself to stop being jumpy and just go to bed. That night, I dreamt about an old workshop. I was standing at a wooden table, looking at some half-finished gadget. It had cogs and small pieces of metal. I could smell sawdust. I heard a series of soft taps behind me. When I turned around, I saw the wind chime hanging in the corner, barely visible in the dim light. I reached out, and the chime swayed. I jerked awake with a tight feeling in my chest. My eyes were wide and my heart pounded. I didn't move for a minute. I stared at the ceiling, breathing heavily. The room was dark, but I felt as if something was out of place. Eventually, my pulse slowed down and I rolled over, trying to calm myself. The next morning, I made a decision. I took the wind chime out of the closet. I set it on the kitchen table and examined it again. I didn't see anything strange about it. No hidden mechanism, no weird carving, just smooth wood. I touched each tube, felt how they were hollow, tapped them gently. I placed it down and looked at it for a long time. Then I took it outside to the backyard. I found a spot on my porch where there was a small hook near the edge of the roof. I hung the chime there in plain view of the sun and any breeze. I stepped back. It moved gently in the wind, making a soft clinking sound. It felt more natural to have it outside. I watched it for a few minutes. The air was cool and the slight breeze made me shiver, but at least I knew any movement out there would have an obvious cause. For a week, I left it there. During the day, I'd sometimes hear it faintly when I was in the living room or the kitchen, but it sounded normal. just a wind chime doing what wind chimes do. At night, I slept fine. No strange phone calls, no weird noises. I started to wonder if maybe that was all it took, just letting it be where it was meant to be. One afternoon, though, I went outside to water the potted plants near the porch, and I saw the chime lying on the ground. The hook was still attached to the roof, but the chime string had snapped. The wooden pieces were scattered. I picked them up, feeling a spike of frustration and dread. I checked the string and it looked worn out. Maybe it was old, or the wind had been too strong. I brought the pieces inside and placed them on the kitchen counter. The tubes were scratched in a few spots from the fall. I felt uneasy about it. I decided to fix it up. I went to a small craft store and bought new string. When I got home, I sat down at the table and carefully restrung the chime. I tried to match the original design. I tied strong knots, tested each tube to make sure it hung evenly, then lifted the chime up. It looked fine, a bit worn, but sturdy. While doing this, I couldn't shake the sense that I was meddling with something I should just leave alone. But I pushed that thought away. It was just a wooden wind chime my grandfather made. That was all. Once it was fixed, I left it on the table for the rest of the day. I didn't hear any noises from it. That night, I made sure to put it back outside on a different hook, one that looked more secure. It remained out there for a few more days without incident. Then one evening, I was sitting at the dining table with a sandwich and some paperwork. I heard the wind chime ring once, sharply. It sounded louder than usual, almost like a knock on a door. I set my sandwich down. My stomach felt tense again. I stood up and walked to the back door. I switched on the porch light. The wind wasn't blowing. The trees in my yard were pretty still, yet the chime was moving gently, as if someone had given it a small push. I slid open the door and stepped onto the porch. I looked around the yard. Everything seemed quiet. I touched the chime. It steadied. I looked around once more, felt the hair on my arm stand up, then went back inside and locked the door. After that, I decided to keep my distance. I left the wind chime outside, but I stopped checking on it unless I needed to water the plants. If it fell, I'd pick it up and hang it back. But I didn't linger. I still remembered the night it rang in my office and the call that came soon after. Even though I told myself it was a coincidence, a part of me didn't want it near where I sleep. I guess I couldn't shake the connection between that unexpected ring and the news about my great aunt. Whenever I thought about hanging it somewhere inside, I felt a clench in my gut. So I didn't. These days, the wind chime just hangs out there on the porch. Sometimes I see it sway in a strong breeze, making that steady, simple sound. It's not fancy. The wood is plain, no carvings or patterns. It's a basic piece of craftsmanship, something my grandfather made with his own hands. But I avoid dwelling on it too much. I haven't heard it ring indoors again since I moved it outside for good. I keep telling myself that whatever happened that night was just a fluke. I don't mention it to most people. They'd probably say it was my imagination or that I was tired from the funeral. Still, when the sun goes down and the house gets quiet, I sometimes catch myself listening for any faint chime sound coming from the office or the hallway. I know the thing's outside, but I listen anyway. I can't help it. My shoulders tense up, and I feel the air around me, checking for any unexplained draft. If I hear something, I tell myself it's just the wind. If I don't, I try to forget about it. But I never put that wind chime in my bedroom or any other part of the house. I figure it's best to keep some space between us. I don't have any logical explanation for it. All I know is, I don't want to relive that first night. If something that simple can leave me this uneasy, I'd rather keep it at a safe distance. And so far, that's worked well enough. I sleep better, and I don't jump at shadows in my own house. The chime stays outside, and I don't question it too much. That's how I handle it now, and honestly, I prefer it that way. I never expected a simple online auction to turn my life upside down. Yet here I am, in my living room at 2 a.m, staring at an old doll that shouldn't be here. My hands are shaking, and I can feel cold sweat gathering at the back of my neck. I want to tell this story because I still need someone to believe me. I don't have any proof, and I'm not sure I want it. But everything I'm about to say happened just like this. My name is David, and I live alone in a small single-story house. It's got 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room, and a narrow backyard with an old wooden fence. I don't have roommates, and I don't usually have many visitors. I spend a lot of my free time online, browsing auction sites for vintage items. I've collected a few oddities over the years, like an antique lamp from 1920 and a typewriter from 1935. I enjoy that kind of stuff. It makes my place feel unique. About a month ago, I stumbled across a listing for a doll. It was from around 1950, according to the seller. The description said it had original clothing, a porcelain face, and delicate features. The photos caught my attention right away. The doll wore a faded blue dress with lace around the collar and cuffs. Its hair was synthetic but styled to look like old-fashioned curls. The eyes were a deep brown, glassy, and oddly realistic. The auction had a low starting bid, so I figured I'd throw in an offer. I won it pretty easily, actually. Hardly anyone else bid on it. I contacted the seller to arrange shipping. That's when the seller wrote something strange. They said, "I'm glad it's going to a new home. It's better that way." I asked what they meant, but they didn't say much else. They just gave me the tracking number and wished me luck. I didn't think too hard about that. Sometimes people get superstitious about old items, or maybe they just get creeped out by dolls. I shrugged it off. The doll arrived in a cardboard box that looked a little beat up. Inside, it was wrapped in layers of newspaper and bubble wrap. I remember the faint smell of mustiness, like it had been kept in an old trunk for years. When I lifted the doll out, I saw how detailed it really was. The face had small cracks in the porcelain near the hairline. The paint on the lips was chipped in one corner. The eyes were open and set in a way that made it look like it was staring right at me. The clothes had small stains, and the lace was discolored, but overall it was in good shape. I set it on a shelf in my spare bedroom. That room is basically a storage space with a desk, some boxes, and the items I collect. At first, nothing strange happened. For about a week, the doll just sat there. I'd glance at it when I walked by, sometimes noticing that the eyes looked too real, but I assumed that was just my imagination. I didn't feel anything unsettling. In fact, I kind of liked having it. It was a cool piece of history. Then one night, I walked by that room on my way to the bathroom. The door was open, and the lamp in the hallway cast enough light for me to see inside. I paused for a second because I thought something looked different. The doll's head seemed to be tilted toward the door. I remembered placing it so that it faced the wall. I distinctly recalled that I set it down with its face looking away because I was worried about the eyes collecting dust or something. I shook my head, assuming maybe I misremembered. I walked in, turned on the light, and carefully set the doll's head so it was facing the wall again. Then I left. I'll admit I felt uneasy. My pulse was a little faster than usual, but I tried not to dwell on it. I told myself that maybe I just put the doll down at a slight angle. I tried to sleep, but I kept hearing little sounds. Most were normal house noises, creaks of the floor settling, the air conditioning clicking on and off. But in my half-asleep state, each noise made my heart pound. I eventually fell asleep and woke up the next day feeling tired. The next night, something even more disturbing happened. I went to check on the doll after dinner. I wanted to be absolutely certain where it was facing. I was determined to keep track of the angle, so I placed it very deliberately. The face was pressed almost fully toward the wall, and I made sure it stayed that way. Then I left the room, shut off the light, and walked to the living room. I spent a couple of hours watching TV. I wasn't thinking about the doll at that point. Then, around 11 p.m., I got up to get ready for bed. I passed by the spare bedroom door and noticed it was slightly ajar, even though I'd left it open wide. I turned on the hallway light and nudged the door open. Immediately, I felt a chill. The doll was looking straight at me. Its head was turned toward the door again. I could see the reflection of the hallway light in its glass eyes. My stomach flipped. My mouth went dry. The hair on my arms stood on end. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I brushed against the door earlier and it shifted. Maybe the doll wasn't as secure on the shelf as I thought, and it moved. But deep down, I felt an uncomfortable sensation in my gut. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that porcelain face. The next morning, I woke up feeling anxious and on edge. I decided I couldn't keep the doll. It was silly to let myself get so freaked out, but I wanted peace of mind. So I grabbed a cardboard box from my closet and some old newspapers. I wrapped the doll carefully and sealed the box with packing tape. I walked outside to my trash bin, lifted the lid, and dropped the box inside. It felt wrong, but I was too uneasy to keep it. Then I closed the lid and went back inside. I tried to push the thought of it out of my mind. I made some coffee, ate breakfast, and forced myself to focus on work. I work from home, so I spent hours at my desk, typing reports and answering emails. By lunchtime, I started to relax. My shoulders weren't so tense, and I felt like I could let out a breath I'd been holding for days. That relief vanished the next morning. I walked outside to grab the mail, and I saw something leaning against my gate. It was that same box, slightly torn at one corner. It was propped upright, and the lid was unsealed. I stared at it, my heart hammering in my chest. I slowly stepped forward and opened the box. The doll was there, still wrapped in newspaper. I felt panic rising in my chest like a wave. My arms were shaking. My throat tightened. The air felt too cold for a sunny day. I checked my trash bin. It was empty because it had been collected earlier. Somehow the doll was out of the bin and waiting for me by the gate. I don't know if someone thought it was a mistake and pulled it out, or if it crawled there by itself. I know how insane that sounds, but there it was. I picked up the box and carried it inside. The doll's weight seemed heavier than before, but maybe that was just my anxiety. I set it on the kitchen table and stood there, looking at it. My skin was clammy, and I could feel my pulse in my temples. I wanted to throw it out again, but I couldn't risk a repeat of that experience. I decided to store it in the garage instead. I figured if someone was messing with me, they wouldn't know I'd put it there. I went to the garage and found an old plastic storage bin with a lid. I placed the doll inside, covered it with an old towel, and snapped the lid shut. Then I slid the bin onto a shelf in the corner. I stood there for a moment, heart still racing, trying to steady my breathing. Eventually, I walked back into the house and locked the door behind me. I forced myself to keep busy, cleaning the kitchen and vacuuming the living room. Each time I heard a soft creak from the garage side of the house, my heart skipped a beat. By evening, my nerves were shot. I called a friend of mine, Mark, just to talk about normal things. I didn't tell him about the doll because I felt embarrassed. I didn't want him to think I was losing it. We talked about sports and some TV shows. By the time I hung up, it was late, and I was exhausted. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. I wasn't sure why. My heart was beating fast and my mouth felt dry. I looked at my phone. No notifications. I listened for any noises. At first, everything was quiet. Then I heard a faint tapping sound. It was coming from somewhere near the garage door. It was a repetitive, soft thump-thump, like someone gently knocking on wood. My body tensed. My breath caught in my throat. I got out of bed slowly, grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand, and walked toward the kitchen. The tapping continued, steady and light. When I reached the door to the garage, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the doorknob. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I turned the knob and opened the door a crack, shining the flashlight inside. The tapping stopped. I stepped into the garage. It smelled like motor oil and dust. The flashlight beam swept over the concrete floor and the shelves. The storage bin was still in the corner. The lid looked secure. No one was in there. I approached the bin, each step echoing on the floor. My legs felt stiff, like I was on the verge of trembling. I rested a hand on the bin. It was cold to the touch. I didn't hear any noise coming from inside it. After standing there for a solid minute, I backed away and turned around, returning to the house. I locked the door behind me and double-checked every window. Then I tried to sleep again, but it took a long time. In the morning, I woke up tired and groggy. I went straight to the garage to see if the bin was still there. It was. The lid was secure, and everything looked normal. I decided I had to do something else. Throwing the doll away wasn't working. Keeping it in the garage was driving me insane. So I posted an ad online. I listed it as a vintage doll for free. I just wanted it gone. I got a response from a local collector. He said he'd pick it up that afternoon. I didn't mention anything strange about it. I told him it was in decent condition, just a little worn. He arrived in a pickup truck, a tall guy, maybe in his 40s. I handed him the storage bin, explaining that the doll was inside. He opened the lid, glanced at the doll, and nodded. He seemed pleased to get it. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders as he drove away. I thought, finally that's done. That night, for the first time in days, I slept without interruptions. No weird noises, no tapping. My house felt calm again. I woke up feeling light and relieved. I made breakfast, did some work, and didn't think about the doll. Everything was normal for a whole day and a half. Then, early the following morning, I heard my doorbell ring. I got out of bed, heart pounding because I never get visitors that early. I checked the time on my phone, 7 a.m. I opened the door and there was no one there, but on my front step was the storage bin. The lid was ajar. Newspaper was sticking out. I recognized the same leftover packing material I'd used. I didn't want to touch it. I stood in my doorway, heart racing, breath coming in short bursts. Eventually, I steeled myself. I walked forward and looked inside. The doll was sitting upright, the same faded blue dress, the same cracked porcelain face. It was back. I felt dizzy. My stomach churned. I thought I might faint. I looked around the yard, the street, everywhere. No sign of the pickup truck guy. I didn't see a note either. It was just the bin and the doll. I didn't know what to do. I dragged the bin inside and shut the door quickly. My legs felt weak and I had to sit down on the couch. I stared at the bin, trying to control my breathing. That's where I'm at right now. The doll is in the bin, right here in my living room. I don't want it here, but I'm scared to move it. I'm afraid it'll just come back again or something worse will happen. My hands are shaking while I talk about this. I keep glancing at the bin, expecting the lid to pop open. I don't have answers. I only have what I've seen with my own eyes. It's an old doll from 1950, and it won't leave me alone. That's the whole story so far. I know it sounds crazy. I know people might say I'm imagining everything or that someone's playing a prank. But I've checked all the possibilities I can think of. Nobody I know has any motive to do this. The seller wouldn't bother tracking me down. The local collector disappeared without a trace. Yet this doll keeps ending up back at my house. I'm telling you this because I can't keep it to myself anymore. I don't know where it'll end or what else might happen. And right now, I'm too scared to find out. I got to the villa late on a Wednesday afternoon. The place looked old and sturdy, with walls that had chipped paint and uneven brickwork. I noticed a big stone wall right next to the property, running along the edge of a field. I was there for research on rural architecture, but I had no interest in local legends. That changed as soon as I checked in and spoke with the owner. He was a tall guy with a stern face. He welcomed me at the entrance. His hair was gray and short. He offered me a cup of coffee while he showed me around. The interior of the villa had wooden floors that creaked with each step. Dusty pictures hung on the walls in narrow hallways. The owner pointed out the guest room. It had a simple bed, a small table, and a single chair in the corner. The window faced that old stone wall. After he set my bags down, the owner said, "People came here now and then to look for some treasure." He said they believed there was gold or something valuable hidden in the base of that wall. I frowned at him because it sounded ridiculous, but he shrugged. He told me he sometimes heard noises at night, stones scraping, metallic clinks against the rock. He claimed no one was ever found digging, though. He said the next morning, everything would look normal, like nobody had touched a single stone. He told me to keep an eye out if I got curious. I wasn't sure if I believed him, but it felt like something I should note for my research. Maybe it was a local rumor to attract visitors. I decided to see the wall up close before dinner. I stepped outside, walked across a small patch of overgrown grass, and approached the stone structure. The wall was about 7 feet high, made of thick stone blocks. Some blocks had cracks filled with tiny weeds. Others had little patches of moss. I ran my hand over the surface. It felt cool and rough. Then I felt a sudden pressure building in my head. It felt like someone pressing on my temples. I moved back, shook my head, and the feeling faded. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe I was just tired from my trip. I looked around to see if anyone else was nearby, but I saw no one. I stepped closer again, touching a different section of the wall. The same pressure came back. It wasn't painful, but it was uncomfortable, like a mild headache that focused on the top of my skull. My heartbeat sped up. I let go of the wall and backed off again. The pressure subsided. I went inside and asked the owner if he ever felt strange near that wall. He paused for a second and then said he never stood too close. He only knew the local tales and that sometimes visitors said they felt odd around it. He laughed a bit and guessed maybe it was just psychological. He told me not to worry. I nodded and dropped the subject. I felt uneasy, but I figured I'd just stay away from that wall unless I needed to check it for my research. That night, I had a quick meal in the villa's small dining room. The owner had a simple dinner ready, rice, beans, and some roasted vegetables. We didn't talk much. He seemed tired, and I was busy thinking about my schedule. By the time I finished eating, it was almost dark outside. I went to my room and unpacked a few things. Around 11, I heard scraping noises. I put down my pen and listened closely. It sounded like someone shifting small rocks around. I opened my window and looked out. I couldn't see much. The night sky was cloudy, and the only light came from a single lamp near the villa's main door. The stone wall was just a dark shape. I considered going outside, but I felt a bit uneasy about it. The noise stopped after a minute or so. I waited another few minutes in silence, then closed my window. I tried to sleep, but around midnight I heard a faint clink again. It made me sit up in bed. My ears felt like they were straining to catch any sound. I forced myself out of bed and slipped on my shoes. I opened the door to my room quietly and walked down the hallway. My steps sounded too loud on the wooden floor. I opened the front door of the villa and stepped outside. The air was cool and damp. I moved toward the stone wall, taking careful steps on the grass to avoid noise. The scraping noise continued, but it sounded more distant than before. When I got close, it stopped completely. I stood there for a moment, trying to see if anyone was there. The darkness around me felt thick, but I saw no movement. I walked along the length of the wall, running my flashlight over it. The beam lit up the cracks in the stones. Everything looked still. I bent down and touched one of the stones near the ground. It was firm. Nothing seemed loose or disturbed. I stayed out there for a few minutes, waiting. I heard nothing else. I felt that pressure creeping back into my head, though. It was the same sensation as before, a dull force that pushed at the top of my skull. I took a step back and the pressure started to decrease. I decided I'd had enough for the night. I went back inside and tried to sleep again. The next morning, I woke up early. I wanted to see the wall in daylight and check for any signs of tampering. I walked outside at around 7. The sky was clear, and the sun was just starting to shine on the villa's yard. I studied the wall from left to right. Every stone looked like it was in place. No fresh dirt, no loose rocks on the ground. I leaned in a bit closer at one point, but the pressure came back. I felt sweat forming on my forehead, even though it wasn't hot. I stepped back again. I felt my hands trembling a little. It was mild, but I noticed it. I decided I wouldn't touch the wall again unless I had a solid reason to. That day, I focused on my research. I drove to a nearby town to look at an old church and talk with the local historical society. During the drive, I kept thinking about that pressure in my head. I kept hearing those scraping noises in my memory. I forced myself to concentrate on the road. By the afternoon, I was back at the villa with a notebook full of notes about local architecture, but I felt no closer to understanding what was happening near that wall. I saw the owner in the courtyard sweeping some leaves. I asked if anyone else had reported those noises that night. He said I was the only guest and he hadn't left his room after 10. He looked a bit concerned, but told me not to get too wrapped up in the rumors. Then he offered me a glass of water. I drank it, feeling my throat was dry, and thanked him. That evening, after dinner, I felt restless. My curiosity about the wall had grown. I hated the idea of not understanding something so close. I decided I would stay up and keep watch from my window. I turned off the lights in my room around 10, but I stayed near the window. The sky was clear, and the moon provided a bit more light than the previous night. Around 11, I heard a soft scraping noise again. It wasn't constant. It sounded like short bursts of someone moving stones and then stopping. I held my breath and peered out my window. I could see the shadow of the wall, and I thought I saw a figure standing close to it. I couldn't be certain, but it seemed like someone was there. My heart pounded as I considered my options. I grabbed my flashlight, slipped on my shoes, and went into the hallway. Every board under my feet squeaked. I cringed but kept going. Outside, I moved around the side of the villa, keeping my flashlight off at first. I walked carefully, eyes on the wall. I heard another scraping noise. It was louder this time, like someone chipping at a stone. When I was about 20 feet away, I switched on the flashlight and pointed it at the wall. The noise stopped immediately. I took another few steps forward. I heard a rustling sound, like cloth brushing against stone. Then there was silence. I shined the light along the base of the wall, saw nothing but weeds and dirt. No tools, no footprints that I could make out. My palms felt clammy, and I wiped them on my pants. The pressure in my head started up again, stronger this time. My vision felt a bit narrow, so I leaned against the villa's outer wall and took a few deep breaths. I called out, "Who's there?" My voice sounded shaky. I waited. Nothing answered. The air felt cold against my face. I forced myself to approach the stone structure one more time. I looked at the blocks near the ground. I couldn't see any fresh marks or anything that looked like it had been dug up. My head pounded a bit, so I stepped back again. The sensation started to ease off. I stayed out there for maybe 10 minutes, shining the light around, listening for footsteps. Nothing. Eventually, I went back to my room. My mind wouldn't settle. I paced around for a few minutes. I sat on the edge of the bed, thinking about what could cause that head pressure. My arms felt tense and my shoulders ached. I tried to rub my neck to relax. I ended up lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for morning. The next few days followed a similar pattern. I'd work on my research during the day, but at night I kept hearing those strange sounds. I tried approaching the wall multiple times. Each time I felt that crushing sensation around my skull. Each time the sound stopped before I could catch anyone. I began to think maybe I was missing something obvious, but the lack of any evidence of tampering baffled me. The stones were always intact. No holes or loose dirt around. The owner seemed worn out. He told me it was part of life there. People claimed the wall was haunted or enchanted. Some believed in the treasure story. He thought it was a hoax or some local trick. On my last night, I decided to try a different approach. I set up a small camera on my windowsill, pointed at the wall. I turned off all my lights and left the camera rolling. I sat at the foot of my bed, waiting. Around midnight, I heard that scraping again. It was quiet, but steady this time. I didn't move. I watched the camera's live feed on my phone. The small screen showed the dark outline of the wall. The scraping noise continued for about 3 minutes, but the video showed no one there. No movement at all. I felt my pulse racing. My mind tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was an animal or shifting stones. But the stones never showed any movement in the morning. The camera footage was empty. Then the scraping stopped. My head started to pound even though I wasn't near the wall. I pressed my hand to my forehead, massaged the skin above my eyebrows. The pressure made me feel dizzy. It faded after a minute, I slept poorly that night. In the morning, I packed my bags. I went outside to do one final check around the wall. I didn't get too close this time. I just walked along the yard, scanning the stones from a distance. Same as before, it all looked normal. I felt a faint pressure in my head, like an echo of the stronger pains. I forced myself to ignore it and headed back to the villa. I paid the owner, thanked him, and told him I appreciated the hospitality. He just nodded and said he was sorry about the odd noises at night. He said he hoped it hadn't caused me too much trouble. I shrugged. I couldn't explain it, so I didn't try. I loaded my bags into my car and started the engine. Before I drove off, I looked over at the stone wall one last time. It stood there, silent and solid. I felt a slight tightness in my temples. I faced forward, gripped the steering wheel, and drove away. As I left, the feeling in my head slowly lifted. My body felt lighter. My shoulders relaxed a bit and my grip on the wheel loosened. I kept an eye on the rearview mirror for a while, half expecting to see some figure standing there or some stones moving on their own. I saw nothing out of the ordinary, just a quiet villa and an old wall that refused to give up its secrets. I never found out what caused those noises. I never saw a single person actually digging. I never discovered any hidden treasure. But that pressure in my head felt real every time I got near that wall. Maybe it was just stress or suggestion. Maybe there was more to it. All I know is that whenever I think back to that place, my temples feel tight for a moment, like my body remembers something I can't explain. I try not to dwell on it, but sometimes at night I recall the scraping sounds, and I feel a tingle in my forehead. It makes me wonder if someone or something is still out there, shifting those stones in the dark. I got back from the Caribbean cruise feeling relaxed and a little sunburned, but I didn't expect anything strange to happen afterward. I was excited to show off my souvenirs, talk about the tropical beaches, and laugh about the late-night parties on the ship. Instead, I found myself waking up to quiet whispers in my own home, wondering if I was losing my mind. I'm still not sure how it all started, but I can pinpoint the moment things got weird. The day I brought that black patchwork doll into my house. I bought the doll at a small street market during one of the cruise stops. The place was crowded with locals selling hand-carved trinkets, woven bags, and colorful masks. I wandered around, just looking for something unique to bring back. An older man stood at a corner table, smiling in a calm way, like he knew I'd show up. He had this small doll made of black fabric scraps with odd symbols stitched all over its body. The thread was coarse, and the doll's arms and legs were thin and uneven. I picked it up, felt the rough texture, and asked him what it was. He said it was traditional in his village. He didn't explain much else. I looked at it, shrugged, and asked for the price. He gave me a small number, so I handed him some cash and slipped the doll into my bag. I remember him looking at me with serious eyes, but I didn't think about it too much at the time. When I got home, I tossed my suitcase in my bedroom and placed the doll on a shelf in the living room. I didn't have a clear idea of how to display it, so I just leaned it against a stack of old DVDs. That first night, I slept without any trouble. I was exhausted from the flight and the taxi ride home, so I crashed on my bed in my clothes. The next day, I unpacked, did laundry, and tried to get back into my routine. At around midnight, I sat on the couch watching a random TV show. My eyes felt heavy, so I turned off the television and headed to my bedroom. As I passed the living room shelf, I glanced at the doll. Its head drooped forward, the embroidered eyes pointing down. The symbols on its body looked a little creepy in the dim light, but I told myself it was just a harmless souvenir. I fell asleep, but I woke up a few hours later. My room was quiet except for a faint buzzing from the hallway light fixture. I heard a whisper, soft and drawn out, coming from the direction of the living room. At first, I thought it might be the wind outside, but it sounded more like a voice repeating short phrases that I couldn't understand. My heart pounded against my ribs, and my mouth went dry. I stayed still, listening. After 10 or 20 seconds, it faded. I got up, reached for the small flashlight on my nightstand, and crept toward the living room. I didn't turn on the main lights. I just aimed the flashlight around. Nothing seemed out of place. The windows were closed. The door was locked. The clock on the wall read 3 in the morning. Then I shone the light on the shelf where I had placed the doll. It lay on its side, not leaning against the DVDs anymore. I couldn't recall if I had left it like that, so I shrugged it off and put it back in a sitting position. I felt a bit uneasy, but I told myself it must have slipped. I went back to bed, trying to calm my breathing. Sleep eventually came, but it was restless. The next night, I tried to ignore my nerves. I had dinner, played some music, and answered a few emails. I caught myself glancing at the doll more than once. It didn't move or shift, but I felt uneasy with it in the house. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and went to my bedroom. I lay there in the dark, my mind drifting. An hour later, I heard it again, that hushed, repetitive murmur. It came from near the door to my living room, or maybe near the window. My stomach twisted. I rubbed my temples, wondering if I was half asleep. The whispering persisted. My heart thumped, and I got out of bed. This time, I flipped on every light switch on my way to the living room. The second the lights illuminated the room, the whispering stopped. I stood in the middle of the living room, listening to my own breathing. Then I looked at the shelf. The doll lay face down this time, its arms spread wide. My chest felt tight. The only explanation was that it fell off balance. I leaned down, touched it, and felt the stiff, uneven stitching along its head and neck. I propped it upright again, placing it so it wouldn't topple over. I turned around, checked the door and windows, and saw no sign of forced entry. Everything was locked. Eventually, I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep well. Over the next few days, the same pattern continued. I'd hear whispers late at night, always in short bursts, always in a strange tone that didn't match any language I knew. I tried recording it with my phone once. I set it to record, placed it on the living room table, and waited. I heard the whisper, but when I played the audio back, there was only silence. No static, no voices, just dead air. My hands shook when I realized I couldn't capture the sound. I started to wonder if I was hallucinating. I even made an appointment with my doctor, thinking maybe I was overtired or stressed. The medical check showed nothing unusual. One night I woke up to a sharp thump near the living room. I jumped out of bed, legs shaking, and hurried to see what happened. The doll was on the floor, close to the window. The shelf was a few feet away, so it must have fallen pretty far. I picked it up and felt a chill on the back of my neck. The cloth was cold, almost damp. I heard another whisper right behind me, but I spun around and there was nobody there. I clenched my jaw, telling myself to calm down. I put the doll back on the shelf and pressed my hands against my face. My palms were sweaty. I wondered if I should throw the doll out, but a part of me felt like that might not solve anything. Maybe the doll had nothing to do with it, or maybe it had everything to do with it. I wasn't sure anymore. I started sleeping with the bedroom door locked. I knew it was pointless if something supernatural was going on, but it made me feel a little safer. My nights turned into a series of jolts awake, straining to hear if the whisper had started again. Usually it did. It always stopped the moment I turned on the lights. I checked every corner, expecting to find some trick or hidden speaker, but I never found any explanation. One evening, I decided to test a theory. I took the doll and locked it in a small storage closet near the laundry area. I placed it in a shoebox, sealed it with tape, and slid it to the back of the closet. Then I closed the closet door and jammed a chair against the handle. I wanted to see if I still heard those whispers. At around 3 in the morning, I woke up to that same low voice. It sounded more muffled this time, like it was coming from behind a wall. My hands shook and my breath was shallow. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and walked toward the laundry area. The chair was still in place, the closet door was closed. Yet I heard the voice from inside, a low, rhythmic chant. My scalp tingled and my knees felt weak. I yanked the chair away and opened the door. The shoebox was on the floor, lid still taped. When I opened the box, the doll lay there, motionless, no sign of movement. But the whispering had stopped. My mouth felt dry. and my pulse raced. I taped the box shut again, pushed it back into the closet, and slammed the door. I wanted to forget about it, but I couldn't. I started keeping all the lights on at night. My electricity bill jumped, but I didn't care. I took cat naps during the day because my nights were nerve-wracking. Even with the lights on, I sometimes heard the whispering near my front door. I'd rush over, yanking the door open to see if there was someone outside, but the hallway would be empty. I wondered if my neighbors heard anything. Nobody said a word to me. Maybe it was too soft for anyone else to notice. One afternoon, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a plastic bag from under my sink and marched to the closet. I ripped the tape off the shoebox and pulled out the doll. It felt heavier than before, like it had absorbed moisture or something. I stuffed it into the bag and drove to a thrift shop a few miles away. I got out of my car, walked to the drop-off box and tossed it in. My hands trembled as I let go of the bag. I knew it was a weird thing to do, but I was desperate to get that doll out of my home. When I got back, the place felt emptier. I tried to stay positive. I cooked a simple dinner, turned on the TV, and tried to relax. That night I slept better. I didn't wake up to whispers or strange noises. The next evening, things stayed quiet too. I started to feel normal again. I told myself I must have been imagining things, and that my mind created those whispers because I was spooked by the doll's creepy appearance. But after 3 nights of peace, I came home late from work. When I walked into the living room, I flipped on the light, and my breath caught in my throat. The doll was sitting on my coffee table right in the center. No bag, no explanation. The same black patchwork, the same stitched symbols. It was angled so its face pointed right at me. My shoulders tensed, and my fingers went numb. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it. I checked every window, every lock, every room. No sign of forced entry. Nothing was missing except for my sense of safety. I had no plan for what to do next. I felt panic tighten my chest and I started shaking. My head pounded. I picked the doll up, walked outside to the garbage chute at the end of the hallway, and tossed it in. I let the heavy door slam shut behind it. Then I walked back into my apartment, breathing hard. My skin tingled all over and my shirt stuck to my back with sweat. That night I tried to stay awake in my bed with the lamp on. Around 2 in the morning I nodded off. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up to the whisper again. This time it was next to the bedroom door. I bolted upright, grabbed a baseball bat I keep under my bed for emergencies, and flipped on the overhead light. The whisper cut off. I opened the bedroom door. The doll was there, sitting upright on the floor. The embroidered eyes seemed to stare at me. I froze. My vision narrowed. I dropped the bat and clenched my fists, at a complete loss for what to do. I scooped up the doll, my breathing ragged, and flung open my front door. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I drove out of town, about 30 minutes away, to a small park with an open trash can near the entrance. I yanked the doll out of the car and shoved it into the can. Then I got back in my vehicle and sped home. My fingers were stiff on the steering wheel. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something in the back seat. Nothing was there. Since that night, I haven't seen the doll again. I try not to think about it. I keep the television on for noise and sleep with my phone by my ear, playing music. Sometimes I catch myself worrying that the whispers will return. Late at night, I'll pause whatever I'm doing and listen. I've heard a few odd creaks in the walls, but no whispers. I haven't found the doll anywhere in my apartment. It might stay gone this time, but I'm on edge. I can't look at my shelves without remembering how I used to see it there, with those strange symbols sewn into its fabric. I'm not sure if there was ever a logical explanation, or if I got tangled up in something beyond my understanding. All I know is I never want to see that doll again. And if I ever go on another cruise, I'll think twice before buying anything labeled traditional. My life has been quiet for now, but that memory still makes my skin crawl. I don't hear the whispers anymore, yet I can't shake the feeling that they could start up at any moment. It's been a tense few weeks and I'm still jumpy at night. But at least I can sleep without waking up to that low, unfamiliar murmur. I keep telling myself I got rid of it for good. I guess only time will tell. I got this job at the Lakewood House in early May. I remember my first impression when I walked through the main doors. The place was bigger than I expected, and the ceilings felt like they went on forever. The manager handed me a set of keys and told me I'd be in charge of cleaning the hallways after midnight. I thought it would be easy. I needed the money, and I didn't mind working nights. But from the very start, people warned me about odd noises on the second floor. I laughed it off. I didn't see any reason to worry. It was an old building, and old buildings make strange sounds. That was my thinking on my first night. I arrived at around 11:30 p.m. My shift always started after most guests went to bed. The manager told me they'd hired me because they needed someone who wouldn't scare easily. People complained about footsteps overhead when no one was there. I heard those stories and figured it was just pipes or creaking floorboards. The older cleaning lady, Carmen, shook her head every time I brushed off the rumors. She said I'd see for myself. I said, "Okay, I'll handle it." The building sits right at the edge of the famous Lake Willow. From the outside, it looks like an old mansion that was turned into a guest house. It's 3 stories tall, and the second floor doesn't get much use. The manager mentioned some structural issues up there, so they've been slow to rent out those rooms. Most guests stay on the first or third floors. It's cheaper and closer to the main dining area. The second floor halls stay dark after midnight. They keep the lights off to save power, or at least that's what I was told. On my first official night, I walked down the main corridor on the first floor. I pushed my cleaning cart in front of me. I had a mop, a broom, some spray bottles, and rags. The hall looked normal enough. Dark wallpaper, old paintings, a few large windows with thick curtains. I heard the distant hum of the lake outside. A gentle wind sometimes pushed branches against the windows, which caused soft scraping sounds. That didn't bother me too much, but I kept looking over my shoulder for some reason. I felt like I wasn't alone, even though I'd just seen the guests turn in for the night. At around midnight, Carmen joined me for a quick walkthrough. She kept talking about the second floor. She said, "They come out around now." I asked her who they were. She said, "Tall shadows, taller than any man I've ever seen." I nodded, but didn't say anything. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or anything like that, so I figured she was exaggerating. After a few minutes, she returned to her room, leaving me to do my job. I went around dusting and mopping the first floor hall. I wiped down the banisters on the big curved staircase that led up to the second floor. The steps creaked with every movement. The wood was old and the boards felt a bit soft under my feet. I looked up at the second floor landing. It was dark, but a small lamp in the corner cast a yellowish glow on the floor. I didn't see anything strange, so I finished my work on the first floor and decided to investigate the upper level. Part of my job was to tidy up all hallways, so I had to go upstairs eventually. When I got to the top of the stairs, I flipped a switch on the wall. One overhead light flickered and then stayed on, illuminating a narrow section of the corridor. The rest of the hallway was still in shadow. I pushed my cart a few steps forward. I immediately felt a chill. It wasn't cold air from the lake, because I'd have felt a draft. This was something else, like the atmosphere itself got heavier. I tried to ignore it. I started cleaning the floor, sweeping up dust and debris. The corridor floor was old hardwood. Each step made a slight squeak. My own footsteps echoed in a weird way, like the sound was bouncing off walls that were too close or maybe angled strangely. After a few minutes, I paused to check the other end of the hall. That's when I thought I heard a second set of footsteps. They were faint, like someone was walking in socks on a wooden floor. I stopped moving. The sound stopped too. I listened carefully. Nothing. I took a few steps again, and then I heard it once more. It seemed to match my pace, as if someone was following me at a distance. That set me on edge. I looked around for an explanation, maybe a loose floorboard that echoed in 2 different spots. But the footsteps seemed to come from behind me, around a corner. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No answer. I kept going, but my heart was pounding. I usually don't scare easily, but there's something about an empty corridor that can get under your skin. I turned the corner, pushing the cart slowly. The only light was that single overhead bulb behind me, so this new stretch of hallway was almost dark. I saw the outline of a big window at the far end. The curtains were closed, and the fabric looked thick. I felt a breeze, though, so maybe a draft was coming through the old frame. I figured I'd check if the window was locked. I walked over and reached out to part the curtains. As soon as I touched them, I felt a sense of unease. My hand was shaking a bit, and I didn't know why. The fabric felt damp and cold. I pulled one side back, trying to see if the window latch was secure. The glass was fogged up. I couldn't see outside, but I guessed the lake was somewhere out there in the darkness. I shut the curtain again and turned around. That's when I saw a quick movement in my peripheral vision, like something tall passing by the far end of the corridor. It was too fast to make out details. All I saw was a shape, maybe a head and shoulders that reached higher than any normal person's. I froze and stared. Nothing was there now, just a blank wall and closed doors. I told myself I was just tired. Maybe I'd worked too many shifts in a row. But I kept thinking about what Carmen said, about tall shadows. My pulse felt strong in my temples, and my palms were sweaty. I left the curtains alone and went back to my cleaning cart. I decided to sweep the rest of the hallway quickly. The corridor wasn't that long, but it felt like it stretched on forever. Each door I passed had a small metal plaque with a room number. All the doors were locked. The manager said they didn't rent these rooms out often. Some needed renovation. I didn't hear any voices behind those doors and no lights shone from under them. I moved to the next section of floor. That's when I heard footsteps again, louder this time. They were behind me. I spun around and the corridor was empty. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't my imagination. I know the difference between normal building sounds and the noise of real feet on wood. My legs felt heavy, and my mouth went dry. I forced myself to take a few deep breaths. I tried to think logically. Maybe a guest had wandered up here by mistake. Maybe one of the staff was playing a prank on me. I called out again. "Hey, who is that?" No response. I grabbed my flashlight from the cart and shone it around. I checked each side of the corridor. I checked the smaller side passages, the alcoves, even behind a potted plant near the stairs. No one was there. The air felt thick, like I was standing in a place I didn't belong. The silence was so intense that I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. That's when I heard a faint scraping sound. It came from behind one of the locked doors. I put my ear to the door, not sure what to expect. The sound stopped, and there was complete silence again. I decided I'd had enough for one night. I finished a quick sweep and headed back downstairs. I didn't see Carmen again, so I left her a note saying I'd done the best I could, but something felt off. I signed out of my shift around 2 a.m. I walked to my car in the staff parking lot. The wind coming off the lake was cold, and I kept glancing at the second-floor windows. They were dark, but I thought I saw movement in one of them. I got in my car fast and drove home. The next evening, I arrived for my shift and found Carmen waiting by my cleaning cart. She asked how my night went. I told her what I heard, and she nodded like it was nothing new. She said she had seen those tall shapes many times over the years. She called them shadows, but she thought they were connected to the history of the house. She didn't give me many details, just said the place was built in the late 1800s, and that people sometimes talked about strange figures walking the halls. I asked if they ever did anything harmful. She shrugged and said they mostly just watched or appeared at a distance. That didn't make me feel much better. I started my rounds again, double-checking the first-floor corridor. Nothing strange happened there. I headed up to the second floor around midnight. I took the same path, but this time I turned on every light I could find. Some bulbs were burnt out, but at least I had a bit more visibility. The corridor still felt oppressive, though. The walls seemed too narrow, and the air was stale. I kept my flashlight close. I mopped the floor near the window at the end of the hall. The curtains were still damp, and I had this weird feeling that someone was behind them, even though I'd checked the previous night. I tried to ignore it and focused on my cleaning tasks. At around 12:30 a.m., I heard a soft thud behind me. It sounded like someone gently knocking on a wall. I turned and aimed my flashlight. I saw nothing. Then I heard the knock again, down by the corner near one of the locked doors. I walked over carefully, holding my mop handle tight. I stood outside the door and waited. The knock came again. 3 soft taps. My throat felt tight, but I forced myself to speak up. "Hello? Do you need help?" Silence. I put my hand on the doorknob. It wouldn't turn. Then the knob rattled on its own, just a brief shaking motion. I stepped back, almost stumbling over my own feet. I watched as the knob went still. I didn't know what to do. The manager had said not to bother with locked rooms, but I felt a jolt of adrenaline, like I needed to see what was in there. I decided it wasn't worth it. I backed away and returned to my cart, never taking my eyes off that door. A few minutes later, the lights flickered. I guess the wiring upstairs is old. The corridor went dark for about 2 seconds, and my stomach twisted. I thought I'd see something in that brief blackout. When the lights came on again, everything looked the same. I almost wished they'd stayed off because the tension was worse with the flickering. I tried to pick up the pace and finish my tasks. I still had trash bins to empty and some wiping down to do. As I moved toward the far end of the hall, I felt that heavy sensation again, like the air was pressing on me. My ears started ringing slightly. I heard footsteps behind me, faster this time, like someone running. I spun around, shining my flashlight. I caught a glimpse of a dark shape darting into a side passage. It was tall, much taller than me. I stand about 6 feet, and this thing looked like it had a foot or 2 on me, maybe more. The shape was black, and I couldn't see a face or clothing. It moved quickly, like a shadow that had gained substance for a second and then vanished. My skin broke out in goosebumps, and my breath got shallow. I wanted to run downstairs right then, but my pride told me I needed to confirm what I'd seen, so I walked toward the side passage. My footsteps felt unsteady. My legs were trembling. The small hallway there led to a tiny storage closet and a locked door that went nowhere. I aimed my flashlight around, but the space was empty. No footprints, no sign of anyone. The door was locked and the closet was full of old chairs and boxes. Nothing else. I decided I'd done enough for the night. I rushed back to the staircase, leaving my cleaning cart in the corridor. I figured I'd get it later or send someone else to get it. As soon as I reached the top of the stairs, I heard another series of footsteps coming from behind. They weren't in sync with mine this time. They moved slower, like someone taking deliberate steps. I didn't look back. I just raced down the stairs, practically jumping the last few steps. When I reached the bottom, I finally glanced up. I thought I saw a shape leaning over the railing, but the lights were too dim to be sure. I felt like my heart was in my throat. I found Carmen in the laundry room on the first floor. I told her I'd seen enough. I was trembling, and I could barely speak normally. She gave me a sympathetic nod. She said, "They don't usually come this close. You must have sparked their curiosity." I asked her if the manager knew about this. She just laughed and said, "He's heard the stories, but he doesn't believe. He thinks it's just our imaginations." I left early that night. The next day I came back for my shift with more determination. I didn't want to quit. I needed the money, and I felt like I'd be letting my nerves get the best of me if I just walked away. But every night was the same. Strange footsteps on the second floor, occasional glimpses of something tall moving in the corners of my vision, and that unbearable feeling of being watched near the windows and in the darkest parts of the corridor. I never saw a face, never heard words or voices. All I felt was the pressure and the presence. I started cleaning faster, trying to get done before midnight. That helped a bit. I noticed that most activities seemed to happen around 12:30 or 1 a.m. If I could get upstairs, do a quick job, and get out, I'd avoid most of it. But some nights I'd hear those footsteps even earlier. Other nights I'd catch a glimpse of a shadow by the window, or I'd see a door handle move on its own. Over time, I learned little tricks. I'd keep multiple lights on, and I'd make noise while I worked so I couldn't hear every little sound. I started bringing a portable radio, which drowned out the footsteps. But every now and then, I'd still get that cold wave of dread washing over me. I'd stop and realize the hallway was too quiet, or I'd feel someone standing behind me when I was near a locked door. No matter how much I tried to brush it off, I couldn't deny something strange was happening. I never found a logical explanation for any of it. No one showed up in the security cameras, at least none that we could see. The manager once checked the feeds after I reported the footsteps, but he said the tapes showed nothing, just me walking around with my flashlight. Even Carmen insisted that the cameras never caught the tall shadows. She said they were too clever, or that they existed in a space just out of reach of normal sight. I didn't argue. I just kept my head down and did my job. After a while, I stopped asking questions. I made peace with the fact that I'd never be able to explain it. I told myself I'd keep coming back as long as I could handle it. If it got worse, I'd quit. But the job paid well and I had bills to cover. So I stayed. Every night I'd feel that tension in my stomach as I climbed the staircase to the second floor. I'd see movement in the corners and hear soft footsteps behind me. My heart would race and I'd grip my mop handle tight, but I'd keep going. I can't say I've gotten used to it, but I've learned to manage it. I learned which parts of the hallway are the creepiest. I learned that turning on the lights early helps a bit. I also learned that if I speak aloud, sometimes it stays quieter. I say things like, "I'm just here to clean," or "No trouble from me." It sounds stupid, but it helps me feel less scared. The older cleaning lady still talks about them. She says they've been around for decades, maybe since the house was built. She thinks they're tied to the land or the lake somehow. I don't really care about the details anymore. I only care about getting through my shift without losing my nerve. Every now and then I dream about those corridors. In my dreams, the tall shadows stand in doorways and watch me. I wake up with a pounding heart, but I remind myself it's just my job. So every night I'm back here, pushing the cart around, listening to faint echoes of footsteps on old wooden floors. And every night, I feel the same pressure and the same cold presence. I don't know what they are, or why they're here, but I keep going. It's my job. And for now, that's enough. I still remember the day I brought that old cloth clown into my house. I had never paid much attention to my grandfather's collection while he was alive, but when he passed, I ended up with one of his clowns. It looked worn out. The paint on its face had peeled in spots and the material around its arms was frayed. I put it on a shelf in my living room because I felt a small obligation to keep it in sight. That was the first mistake. When I look at it, I see faded colors and chipped paint on its cheeks. The hat is tilted to one side and there's a narrow rip along the seam near its neck. The doll has big cloth shoes and a pair of button eyes. They never move, but I catch myself glancing at them like I expect something to change. The shelf is about 5 feet off the ground. The clown sits in the center, leaning against the wall with its tiny cloth hands resting on its lap. There's a faint musty smell that comes off it, even from a few steps away. I tried to ignore my uneasy feeling. I figured it was just nostalgia mixed with a bit of discomfort about clowns. My grandfather loved them, and it never bothered him. I told myself it was just an old doll. After a few days, I started having strange dreams. At first, they were blurry and quick. I'd see flashes of red and white. Then I'd hear sharp bursts of laughter echoing in the background. I'd wake up, my heart pounding, and my sheets would feel damp with sweat. I'd look around my room, convinced I was imagining it. The alarm clock next to my bed would read 3:14 or 2:57, random times deep in the night. I thought it was stress. Then I heard what sounded like chains dragging in my garage. The first time it happened, I was in bed. It was late. I was still awake because I couldn't stop thinking about that laugh from my dream. Then I heard a scraping sound like metal links moving across concrete. My muscles got tense. My mouth felt dry. My palms pressed against the blanket and I stared at the ceiling. I didn't want to move. I tried to convince myself it was the water heater or some tool shifting position. It continued for about 10 seconds, then stopped. In the morning, I checked the garage. My garage door has a chain mechanism, but everything looked normal. My tools were in the same spots. Nothing was out of place. I tested the garage door, opened it, and closed it. I listened for unusual rattling. It sounded fine. I moved on with my day. I had coffee, scrolled through messages on my phone, and avoided looking at the clown on the shelf. But whenever I passed by the living room, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. My eyes drifted to the clown's face. It appeared exactly the same. The chipped paint, the faded grin, no signs of movement. That night, I dreamt I was standing in a small room lit by a single bulb. There was laughter. It was high-pitched and short, like a repeated giggle in another corner of the room. I remember trying to see who or what was laughing. I couldn't move in the dream. The laughter grew louder, then cut off suddenly. I woke up with my sheets tangled around my legs. I was breathing through my mouth and my heart was racing. I looked at the clock. It was close to 4 in the morning. I got up, drank some water, and walked through the hallway to the living room. I turned on the light, half expecting to see the clown on the floor or tilted in a new position, but it was still on the shelf, leaning like always. I whispered under my breath, telling it to stop. I felt silly doing that, but I couldn't shake the idea that the doll was behind the laughter in my dreams. I'm not someone who believes in haunted objects or curses, but I couldn't explain the timing. I stood there, arms crossed, staring at its chipped face. My knees felt a bit weak. My breath came in small bursts. I reached out and nudged it a little just to see if something felt different. It was just cloth and old paint. The material felt rough, and the face was stiff from the paint that remained. The eyes were 2 black buttons sewn in place. I backed away and left the room. The chain sounds in the garage continued every few nights. Sometimes I'd wake up and hear them right away. Sometimes they'd start while I was lying on the couch trying to watch something on TV. The scraping would last a few moments, then stop. I checked the garage over and over. I inspected every corner, tested the door, tested the chain on the overhead track. Nothing seemed broken. Nothing was out of alignment. I kept all the lights on while I did this. I felt a chill on my arms. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up when I walked back into the house. I glanced at the clown on the shelf, then tried to distract myself. After a week of terrible sleep, I noticed I was losing focus at work. My coworkers would ask if I was okay. I'd shrug it off, saying I wasn't sleeping well. I didn't share the details. I didn't want to talk about the clown or my dreams, but my eyes were bloodshot, and I had dark circles under them. My hands shook a little when I had too much caffeine. My thoughts kept circling back to the nights at home. One evening, I decided to move the clown to the closet. I took it off the shelf. As soon as I touched it, I felt a strange sensation in my stomach, like a sudden drop. I walked it to the closet and placed it on top of some boxes. I stood there for a moment, wondering if that would make a difference. I closed the closet door and exhaled. My shoulders relaxed a bit. I felt like I'd done something to regain control. But that night the dreams returned. The laughter was louder. This time I felt like something was behind me in the dream, brushing against my back. I woke up gasping. My pillow was soaked with sweat, and my hair felt damp at the roots. I sat up in bed, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes. My heart thumped in my chest. I told myself it was just stress. I forced myself to leave the bedroom and check the closet. I opened the door and aimed a flashlight inside. The clown was still there, leaning against the back wall, button eyes facing the door. I stepped back and closed it. Then I heard the chains in the garage. They started as a soft rattle, then dragged for a few seconds. My breath caught in my throat. My mind raced with excuses, but none of them felt convincing. I walked to the garage door inside the house. I turned on the light. I listened. I heard nothing. I stepped into the garage and stood near my car. The overhead light was bright. The door chain was motionless. No tools were moving. I turned around and went back inside, locking the door behind me. My hands trembled as I turned the lock. I tried sleeping again, but I kept hearing that laughter in my head. It repeated in my thoughts, jabbing at my nerves. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried counting backward from 100. Eventually, I drifted off. I woke up 2 hours later, drenched in sweat again. I didn't want to try sleeping after that. Over the next few days, I started avoiding the living room, the closet, and anything related to that clown. I spent more time in my bedroom or kitchen. I'd order takeout and eat in front of my laptop, trying to watch videos to distract myself. I kept glancing at the corners of the room, expecting to see something that shouldn't be there. My shoulders felt tight. I rubbed my neck a lot, trying to ease the tension. One afternoon, I decided to try one last thing. I grabbed an old cardboard box and some packing tape. I went to the closet and wrapped the clown in a plastic bag, then placed it in the box. I sealed it shut. I carried it down to the basement. I had some shelves near a wall with other junk I rarely touched. I placed the box there, away from sight. My heart was beating hard when I did it, but I stayed calm on the outside. I thought maybe out of sight, out of mind. I left the basement, closed the door, and tried to relax in my living room. The shelf was empty now. It felt strange not seeing anything there, but I preferred that. I turned on the TV and flipped through channels for a while. I felt my eyelids getting heavy, so I nodded off on the couch. I slept for about an hour. Then I snapped awake because I heard a single sharp laugh. It sounded like it was right next to my ear. My skin broke out in goosebumps. I looked around the room. Nothing was there. My heart hammered in my chest. I tried to calm my breathing. I realized it was still broad daylight outside. That night, I went to bed around midnight. I fell asleep after wrestling with my thoughts for a while. I woke up when I heard the chain in the garage again. It was the same scraping and rattling. I lay there, my chest tight, my breathing shallow. I tried to listen for footsteps or any other noise. All I heard was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I got up anyway. I walked slowly to the garage door and flipped on the light. Everything was still. I stood there, waiting to hear the chain move. Nothing happened. My forehead was damp with sweat. I dried it with the back of my arm. I went back to bed, but I left the living room light on. My eyelids felt heavy, but my mind was jittery. I was exhausted. The next morning, my alarm woke me for work, and I had only slept a few hours. I felt a headache pulsing near my temples. My coffee tasted bitter even with sugar. The day dragged on, and I couldn't concentrate on much. I kept picturing that clown, imagining it sitting in the basement, sealed in a box, staring at the inside of the cardboard walls. That evening, I considered getting rid of it, but I remembered my grandfather. He cared about his collection. That thought made me hesitate. I also felt uneasy about just throwing it away. It felt risky, and I couldn't explain why. I decided to leave it in the basement for a while longer, hoping things would calm down. For a few days, I didn't hear the chains. The laughter in my dreams was quieter or sometimes absent. I noticed my shoulders loosen up. I started sleeping a little better. I figured maybe that was all I needed to do. But then, on a Friday night, I heard a thud downstairs around 2 in the morning. My eyes shot open and I felt my pulse quicken. It wasn't the garage this time, it was the basement. I crept out of bed, grabbed my phone for light, and stood at the top of the basement stairs. The door was closed, but I could see a sliver of darkness through the gap. I thought about going down to check, but my legs felt stiff. I stood there listening. I heard nothing else. No scraping, no laughter. After a few minutes, I told myself it was probably just the house settling or something falling off a shelf. The next day, I mustered the courage to go downstairs. I checked the box where I had placed the clown. It was on its side, like something had bumped it or knocked it over. The tape was still sealed. I didn't see any signs of damage. I put the box upright and pressed on it gently to make sure it was steady. Then I turned and headed back up. I couldn't figure out how it could have fallen on its own. The floor is cement and the shelves don't wobble. I decided not to think about it too much. I locked the basement door after I came back up. Now, every time I walk through my house, I listen for new noises. I keep the TV or music on to fill the silence. I haven't told anyone the full story. I just say I'm not feeling well or I'm working through some stress. But the tension sits in my muscles, especially at night. I keep a lamp on in my bedroom. Sometimes I hear faint laughter when I'm half asleep, like it's hovering on the edge of my dreams. My throat tightens, and I feel my heart rate spike. Then it passes, and I drift off again for a couple more hours of restless sleep. I wish I knew how to shake this feeling. I still don't believe in haunted objects, at least not in the traditional sense, but I can't deny what's happening. My body reacts in real ways. My heart pounds, my skin tingles, and I break out in cold sweats. My stomach churns. Whenever I think about that old cloth clown, I feel like something is coiled inside me, ready to spring. I haven't touched the box since I picked it up that day in the basement. I'm not sure if I ever will. Maybe I'll call a friend to help me get rid of it. Maybe I'll just leave it down there for good. I haven't decided yet. Right now, I'm just trying to get through the nights. I keep the lights on. I keep the TV volume at a decent level, and I stay alert for any strange sounds. If I hear chains in the garage, I remind myself it might be the metal contracting with the temperature or some random shift in the door mechanism. If I have a dream filled with laughter, I try to calm my breathing and remind myself that dreams aren't real. But the uneasy feeling remains. That's how things stand. I inherited an old, battered clown from my grandfather. I set it on my shelf. I started hearing laughter in my sleep and chains dragging in my garage. I moved it, I boxed it, and the strange events continued. My body feels stuck in a cycle of tension. I'm hoping it will fade over time, but I don't know if it will. For now, the box is in the basement and the closet is empty. My living room shelf is bare. I keep telling myself that everything's normal, but I still jump at sudden noises. I can't relax the way I used to. Every time I close my eyes, I wonder if I'll hear that shrill laughter again. And every time I pass the basement door, I feel a small jolt in my chest, like something might be waiting on the other side. I felt a jolt the moment I stepped into my grandmother's storage room. The smell of mildew and dust filled my nose, and the overhead light buzzed like it was about to go out. I saw the big rag doll in the corner, slumped against a stack of old boxes. Its button eyes stared straight ahead, and its crooked smile looked stiff. I froze in place for a second and felt my heart thump. That doll was almost the same height as me when it sat upright. Its arms were limp, and its faded cloth skin looked like it had been patched a few times. I tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on the shelves and the junk around me, but I kept glancing at its face. It felt like it was looking back at me. I'm a 30-year-old guy and I've never been afraid of dolls or toys, but this one made the hairs on my arms stand up. My grandmother died recently, and I was here to clear out her house. I didn't expect anything strange. I thought I'd just shove some stuff into boxes and maybe find a few keepsakes. But the second I saw that doll, I knew this wouldn't be a simple cleanup. My cousin Brano was in the living room going through old photo albums. I called him over because I thought maybe he'd remember something about this doll, like where it came from or who it belonged to. He walked in slowly, wiping dust off his hands on his jeans. "What's up?" he asked. He looked tired, and he had dirt on his sleeves from sorting through boxes in the attic. I pointed at the doll. "Did you see this thing yet?" I asked. He stepped closer, squinted, and then took a step back. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. I asked if he knew who it belonged to, and he shrugged. He said he didn't remember seeing it when we were younger. Then he cleared his throat and admitted he felt uneasy around it too. He said he only noticed it earlier that day when he passed the storage room. He had the same impression I did. The face seemed to follow him as he walked by. We spent a few more minutes looking around the storage room. It was packed with cardboard boxes, old furniture, broken tools, and random things my grandmother had collected over the years. The doll kept drawing my attention, though. Every time I turned around, I felt like its head was tilted in a new direction. But when I stared at it, it looked normal. Just a rag doll with button eyes and a sewn-on grin. I decided it was probably my imagination, or maybe the shape of the eyes created that illusion. The idea still sent a shiver through me. Later that afternoon, Brano and I split up again. He focused on the attic, and I stuck to the ground floor. I had to go back into the storage room because I needed to move some boxes to the living room for sorting. Each time I passed the doorway, I glanced at the doll. I tried to keep my eyes forward and ignore it, but I couldn't stop checking. I'd walk by fast, and in my peripheral vision, I swore the doll's head shifted a bit. That split second made my chest tighten. I started to feel sweaty and my breathing got shallow. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I was an adult and it was just a rag doll. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. At one point, I stood in the hallway for a solid minute, staring into that room. The doll was near the corner next to an old bookshelf. I wanted to see if it would move while I watched. I focused on its face. It had button eyes with little black threads holding them on, and the fabric around the mouth was fraying. The smile was uneven, with one side higher than the other. Nothing moved. It was completely still. My pulse slowed, and I started to relax. I told myself that I was spooking myself for no reason. I picked up another box and carried it to the living room. About an hour later, I was in the kitchen rummaging through drawers. I found some old silverware, some chipped plates, and a few stray keys. I heard Brano walk in, so I asked him how it was going. He said he had found some boxes of our grandmother's clothes, plus some old records. We talked about random stuff for a while, trying to keep our minds off the weird vibe in the house. Eventually, I decided I should grab a cold drink from the fridge before heading back to the storage room. I was procrastinating. I didn't want to go back in there alone, but I felt stupid admitting it. When I finally walked back to the storage room, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up again. The door was half open. I pushed it the rest of the way and stepped inside. The light overhead flickered. I saw the same clutter, the same boxes, the same broken chair in the corner. But the doll looked different. It was leaning a bit more to the left, almost like it had shifted. I stared at it, and my heart started pounding. It was subtle, but I was sure it wasn't in that position before. I stepped closer and crouched down in front of it. I reached out and touched the doll's arm. The fabric felt coarse. There was no hidden wire or anything that would let it move on its own. It was just cloth stuffed with something lumpy. I caught myself breathing too fast, so I stood up, exhaled, and tried to think logically. Maybe Brano had come in and moved it. But why would he do that? And if he did, why wouldn't he mention it? I almost called out to him. Instead, I grabbed the doll by the arms and set it upright against the wall. It flopped a bit, but I managed to make it face forward. Then I stepped away, still watching it. It stayed put. I turned around and walked toward the door. I kept glancing over my shoulder, waiting to see if it fell or shifted again. It didn't move. My hands were shaking, and I felt a pulse in my neck. I tried to focus on other tasks for a while. I sorted a box of old pots and pans in the kitchen. I flipped through some cookbooks. I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans. But every few minutes, my mind drifted back to that doll, and I felt a wave of unease. Eventually, I mustered the courage to go find Brano. He was in the living room with a big box of photo albums. I asked if he had touched the doll. He gave me a confused look. He said he hadn't touched it since we first noticed it that morning. I told him I found it in a different position. He just stared at me. I saw a flicker of concern in his eyes, but he tried to keep his tone calm. He asked if maybe I bumped into it or something. I said no. We both went to check. The doll was where I had left it, upright against the wall. Brano stepped close, looked at it, then turned to me. He said he felt like the eyes were following him. We stood there for a moment in silence. The house was quiet. I could hear the distant hum of traffic outside, but everything inside felt tense. I felt my palms get clammy, and my stomach tightened. Brano cleared his throat and said he didn't want to spend too much time thinking about it. He wanted to keep sorting stuff. We agreed to keep the doll in the same spot so we could see if it changed position again. A few hours later, around early evening, we decided to wrap up for the day. We packed what we could into our cars. Brano said he was going to stay at a friend's place because he didn't like the energy in the house. I didn't feel comfortable spending the night there either, so I locked up and went home. But I couldn't stop thinking about that doll. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. My thoughts kept drifting back to the button eyes and the crooked smile. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured it leaning forward, as if it was about to stand up. I felt my heart rate pick up just from imagining it. The next morning, I arrived at the house alone. Brino had some errand to run, so he said he'd come by later. When I walked in, I headed straight to the storage room. I was hoping the doll would be in the same spot. Maybe that would prove I was just imagining things. But I found it on the floor, facing the doorway. It looked like it had toppled forward. I stepped inside carefully, my stomach in knots. I kept telling myself maybe it just slid or fell somehow. The floor was wooden, and there was a slight uneven spot near the corner. Maybe it just tipped over on its own, but it felt bizarre seeing it face down like it tried to crawl forward. My hands shook as I picked it up. I pressed my lips together and felt my pulse in my temples. I set the doll in the chair on the other side of the room, away from the door. Then I grabbed some packing tape and an empty box. I told myself I'd seal it up. I didn't want to see it anymore, and I didn't want it to move around. I lifted the doll and tried to stuff it into the box. It barely fit, but I managed to fold its arms and legs in a bit. The button eyes stared up at me. I paused and felt a cold wave of dread sweep over me, like I was violating some unspoken rule. My mouth went dry. Then I snapped the box flaps shut and taped them. I wrote "doll" on the side with a marker and shoved it into a corner. I stood there breathing heavily, telling myself it was over. I spent the rest of the morning sorting more items, staying mostly in the living room and kitchen. But every time I heard a creak or a rustle, I'd stop and listen. The house was old and it always made noises, but now everything felt amplified. I kept glancing at the hallway, half expecting to see that doll again. When Breno finally arrived, he noticed I was on edge. I told him what I did. He nodded and said maybe that was the best thing. Just box it up. He joked that we should burn it, but I told him I didn't feel comfortable doing that. He gave me a sideways look but let it go. We spent the next few hours quietly packing and stacking boxes. We didn't say much about the doll, but I could tell he was thinking about it too. He kept checking the hallway just like I did. At one point, I opened the bedroom closet and saw a reflection in the mirror. I thought for a split second that the doll was behind me, but it was just Breno walking by. My heart hammered for a good minute after that. I hated feeling so jumpy, but I couldn't help it. By the late afternoon, the sun was going down and the house got darker. We turned on some lamps in the living room. Breno asked if I wanted to check on the doll before we left. I hesitated. I didn't want to see it again, but I also needed to know it was still in the box. I grabbed a flashlight and led the way to the storage room. When I flipped the light switch, the bulb flickered once and died. My flashlight beam shook a bit because my hand was trembling. I aimed it at the corner where I had shoved the box. It was still there, taped shut. I breathed out in relief. Breno asked if we should open it and show it to some collector or something. I said I wasn't sure. I didn't want to deal with it anymore. We decided to leave it as is for now. We locked the storage room door and headed out. On the drive back, we didn't say much. My mind kept returning to that sense of being watched. Even though I knew the doll was sealed in a box, I couldn't shake the idea that it was aware of what we did. I still have that box in my carport, waiting to figure out what to do with it. Part of me wants to throw it in the trash. Another part of me thinks maybe we should donate it or just leave it at the house until it's sold. Every time I think about taking the tape off and looking at it again, I feel my stomach twist. I keep replaying the way it seemed to move or fall over on its own. I remember how its face looked like it was following me around the room. I tell myself it's all in my head, that it's just a doll made of fabric and buttons. But even as I say that, I feel that same jolt of fear I felt the first time I saw it. I've decided to let Breno handle the doll when we finish cleaning out the rest of the house. I don't want to deal with it alone anymore. I don't need more sleepless nights thinking about those button eyes. That's the truth of it. It's just an old rag doll, but it made me feel more uneasy than anything else I've come across. And until we finally get rid of it for good, I don't think I'll feel at peace. I heard the first creak on my staircase around 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was lying in bed, half awake, staring at the shadow on the ceiling. The noise was faint at first, like a floorboard shifting under a slow, deliberate step. Then it happened again. Louder, more distinct. I sat up, blinked, and listened. The stairs to my second level squeaked one more time, then fell silent. I felt my heart thumping inside my chest, but I tried to stay calm. I told myself it was probably the wood settling. I forced myself to lie back down and breathe slowly. But even after the noise stopped, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I share this duplex with my brother Nick, but he's gone most of the time because of his job. He's away right now. We bought this place a few years ago when we found a good deal, and we spent months tearing out old walls and installing these new wooden stairs. The building is old, so we knew we'd have some squeaks and groans, but that first night the sound felt different. It didn't sound random. It came in a pattern, like steps in a measured pace. I let it go for the rest of the week. I tried not to let my imagination get too wild, but every night around the same time I'd hear something. Sometimes it was just one creak. Other times, I heard several, one after another, always slow and spaced out. I started losing sleep. I'd wake up sweating, wondering if someone was in the house, but I'd check the door, the windows, everything. I kept a small flashlight in my nightstand. I'd walk around shining it on the floor, the staircase, the walls. I never found anything out of place. The locks were secure. The rooms were empty. By Friday, I was feeling jumpy. I was at work, trying to focus on my computer screen, but I kept thinking about the stairs. I texted Nick and asked him if he'd heard anything strange before he left. He just wrote back once or twice, thought it was the neighbor. But the neighbor's stairs are on the other side of the building. The squeaks we hear at night come from our own steps. I told him that, and he just sent a shrug emoji. That night, I decided to do something about it. I set my phone to record audio. I placed it on the small table in the upstairs hallway, right next to the staircase. I let it run all night. Then I went downstairs, locked up, turned off the lights, and tried to sleep. I felt uneasy. My chest felt tight. I stared at the digital clock on my nightstand, watching the minutes tick by. Nothing happened for a while. Then, around 2:15, I heard the first squeak. I reached for my phone and realized it wasn't next to me. It was still upstairs recording, so I just lay there listening. The squeaks moved upward, one step at a time. Sometimes there was a pause between them. Sometimes they came in quick succession, like someone taking 2 steps in a row. I gripped the sheets and waited. Then everything went quiet again. I couldn't tell if I'd actually heard footsteps or if my mind was exaggerating the normal creaks of an old house. In the morning, I woke up earlier than usual, feeling exhausted. My eyes burned. I stumbled upstairs to get my phone. The recording was still going. I stopped it and played it back while I stood in the hallway. For a while, I heard nothing but background hum and occasional traffic noise outside. Then, just after 2 in the morning, there was a distinct creaking sound. It was followed by another, and another. I counted at least 6 or 7 over the course of 3 minutes. They had a rhythm, like someone climbing at a slow but steady pace. I replayed it a few times, trying to see if it might be random, but it sounded too deliberate. My stomach lurched, my hands started to sweat. I turned the recording off. I felt cold even though it was warm in the hallway. I decided I'd check every inch of that staircase. I grabbed a small toolbox from the closet. I spent the next hour tightening screws, checking the wood for cracks and making sure nothing was loose. The steps were solid. I even stepped on them one by one to see if I could recreate the sounds. The creaks I made sounded a bit different, less pronounced. I didn't like that. It felt like something else or someone else was causing the nighttime noises and I couldn't replicate them. That evening I called Nick again. He was in another state for a conference. I told him about the recording. He sounded skeptical. He said, "Try leaving some lights on. Maybe that'll help, or at least you'll feel less creeped out." I agreed. I left the upstairs lights on, hoping it would keep me calm. I watched TV downstairs until midnight. Then I dragged myself up to my bedroom. I kept the hallway light on too. I tried to read a book in bed, something mindless. My eyes kept drifting to the open door of my room, staring at the faint glow from the hallway. I dozed off eventually. Around 2 in the morning, I snapped awake. My ears were ringing with silence. I sat up. I waited. Then I heard it. The slow, heavy sound of wood bending under weight. One step. Pause. Another step. Pause. My heart hammered in my chest. My legs felt stiff. I reached for the baseball bat I'd started keeping next to my bed. I couldn't see anything from my angle. The hallway was partially lit, but the stairs themselves were around the corner. I stood up slowly. My feet felt like lead. I took a few steps across the room. My mouth felt dry. I heard another creak, closer this time, like it was maybe 1 or 2 steps away from the top of the staircase. I took a deep breath and rushed out into the hallway, flipping the bat in front of me. The stairs were empty. The light was on, and I could see every step clearly. There was nobody there. I flicked my eyes around the landing, the corners, the second bedroom door, the small storage closet. Nothing. No movement, no sign of forced entry. My heart was racing. I stepped all the way down, checking each step. I walked through the living room. I checked the lock on the front door. All secure. The windows were locked. I flipped on every light in the house. I went back to bed around 4 in the morning, feeling paranoid. I barely slept. The next day, a Saturday, I called a friend who works as a contractor. I asked him if there could be some weird structural issue causing these sounds. He said it was possible the wood was expanding and contracting with temperature changes, or that the new installation might be settling. But the pattern sounded unusual to him. He offered to come by and look at it. We scheduled a visit for that afternoon. He came over, tested the steps, looked at the beams under the staircase, tapped on the walls. He shrugged and said everything looked fine. He told me it might just be a normal quirk of the house. I felt frustrated but tried to move on. That night I set up my phone to record again, but this time I also propped up my laptop in the hallway to record video. I didn't trust audio alone anymore. I wanted visual proof. I made sure the hallway light was on so the camera would pick up something if it showed up. I told myself I would get some rest and check in the morning, but my anxiety kept me up. I watched random clips on the internet, anything to distract myself from the staircase. I finally crashed around 1 in the morning, phone next to me in bed this time. I woke up to the faint gray light of dawn. I grabbed the phone, scrolled through messages, and then remembered the recording. My laptop was still out in the hallway, pointed at the stairs. I hopped out of bed and went to see if the battery was still alive. It had shut off after about 3 hours. I cursed under my breath, but at least it had recorded from around midnight until 3. I grabbed the phone, found the audio file, and started skimming through it. I stopped at around 2:10 a.m. The first creak was faint. Then it happened again, louder. The next few squeaks were spaced by a few seconds each, almost like a pattern. I felt my mouth go dry. My hand trembled a bit. I closed the audio and played the video on my laptop. There was about 3 hours of footage. I fast-forwarded until about 2:10. I saw the empty hallway with the stairs. The light was on. Everything was still. Then, right at 2:12, I heard a creak on the audio track of the video, but the screen showed nothing moving. The stairs were empty. No shadows, no shifting, nothing. Another creak, louder this time. Still nothing visible. My heart sank. I paused the video, rubbed my eyes, and replayed that portion. The audio was unmistakable. The stairs made noise like someone stepping on them, but visually they were static, as if no one was there. I decided to stand on the landing and listen. Sometimes, if the house is silent, you can hear the traffic outside or the hum of the fridge. But I wanted to see if I noticed anything weird during the daytime. For about 20 minutes I just stood there, leaning against the wall, waiting for a creak. Nothing happened. The house felt normal in broad daylight. I even jumped on a few steps to see if I could replicate that exact sound. Mine sounded heavier and more abrupt. The recorded footsteps were slower and somehow more deliberate. It gave me chills thinking about it. That afternoon, I double-checked all the vents, the heating system, anything that might cause a pattern of expansion and contraction. Everything looked fine. I even turned the heat off for the night so the temperature inside would stay stable. I figured maybe if the temperature wasn't changing, I wouldn't hear anything. I left all the lights on again and tried to sleep. This time, I actually slept a little better, probably because I was so tired. But I did hear a few noises around 3 in the morning. I groaned, covered my head with a pillow, and tried to ignore them. I didn't want to keep torturing myself, but a part of me still listened. Each time I heard a step, my pulse quickened. I felt sweat on my forehead, but I forced myself to stay in bed until morning. On Monday, Nick came home unexpectedly early. He dragged his suitcase inside, looking exhausted, and tossed it by the door. I told him everything. I showed him the audio recordings. I showed him the video. He frowned, played it back a few times, and shook his head. He said, "That's messed up, man. You're sure nobody's sneaking in?" I told him I checked everything, all the locks, all the windows, the whole place. Nothing suggested a break-in. He walked up and down the stairs, trying to make the same noises. It was close, but not exact. We both felt uneasy. Even having him there didn't calm me down completely. We decided to try staying up together one night just to see if we could catch something in real time. We made coffee, turned on the TV in the living room, and waited. We talked about random stuff, joked around a bit. By 1:30, we were both yawning. The house was silent except for the occasional car outside. Around 2 we paused the TV and listened. For a few minutes, nothing. Then that familiar creak. We both froze. The sound was soft at first, like weight pressing on the 3rd or 4th step from the bottom. We muted the TV. I felt my palms get sweaty. Nick looked at me and nodded. We both stood up and grabbed flashlights. We moved toward the staircase slowly. The next creak came from higher up, maybe halfway. I felt a tightness in my chest. My throat felt dry. We turned the corner to look at the stairs, shining our flashlights. The steps were empty, just polished wood. We heard another creak right in front of us, but there was nothing there. I saw Nick's flashlight beam tremble a bit. My pulse was pounding in my ears. We waited, not breathing, for the next one. It didn't come. We flicked on the hallway light, walked upstairs, checked every room, every closet. Nothing. We returned to the living room, sat down, and stared at each other. Nick said, "I don't get it." We tried to brush it off, but we were both wired. We stayed up until almost 4. We only heard that series of noises once. The rest of the night was silent. In the morning, Nick said he had to leave again in a couple of days for another work trip. He asked if I wanted to stay at a friend's place while he was gone. I shook my head. I want to figure this out. I don't know how yet. I'm keeping my phone ready to record, I'm keeping the lights on, and I'm checking every door twice. But I know what I heard. We both heard it. Every time I walk up or down those stairs, I feel uneasy. It's like I'm waiting for something to grab my shoulder or show up in the corner of my eye. I'm not sure what happens next. I'm not expecting a sudden explanation. All I know is that each night around 2 in the morning, the stairs creak like someone's there, climbing slowly. I haven't seen anyone. I haven't found any physical evidence that anybody's sneaking in. The audio recordings confirm the noises. The video shows nothing. It's hard to sleep, but I try. When I do sleep, I leave a light on and I keep my phone close. Nick does the same when he's around. We talk about maybe bringing an expert in, some kind of home inspector or security person. But for now, we're just living with it. Each time it happens, my heart pounds, my hands shake, and I freeze for a moment, waiting. Then, eventually, the sound stops, and I move on with my night, still tense, still unsure. That's where I'm at now, just waiting for the next creak, the next step, and hoping I can figure out why it keeps happening. I remember the first night I spent in that house. I was 15 and I sat on my bed staring at the walls. The room felt too big. My breathing sounded loud to me because everything else was silent. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I tried to convince myself it was just a normal house and that I needed to calm down. I was wrong. My parents decided to move into that house because they wanted more space and a quiet life. They never liked crowded neighborhoods, and they found a place far from any main roads. The driveway was long, and the neighbors lived pretty far off. The front lawn stretched out in every direction, and there were only a few trees in sight. It looked peaceful. From the outside, the place seemed perfect for a family that wanted space to breathe. I didn't argue with them. Back then, I did what they said. When we moved in, I noticed how the floors creaked. Every step I took felt heavier than usual. I'd walk down the hallway to my new bedroom and my footsteps echoed. I assumed it was because the house was old, but there was something else. Each corner of that place felt like it held something in the shadows. I tried to shake off that feeling by telling myself I was just adjusting, but the first night proved I wasn't imagining it. I sat on my bed, looking at my door. The hall light was off, but I could make out the outline of the frame. I heard this low sound, like a breath or a faint voice. It came from the other side of the door. My chest tightened, and I wondered if my dad was out there checking on me. I called out, "Dad?" No one answered. I waited, holding my breath. The whispering sound faded after a few seconds. I stood up and turned on my lamp. My hand shook. I went to the door, opened it, and looked into the hallway. It was dark and still. Nothing moved. I felt a small chill on my arms. I brushed it off as a draft from somewhere. In the morning, I saw the lock on my bedroom door was undone. The door wasn't wide open, but the lock wasn't engaged. I was sure I had locked it before going to bed because I liked feeling secure. I doubted myself for a moment, telling myself maybe I forgot. But I knew I didn't. I decided not to mention it to my parents. I didn't want them to think I was anxious for no reason. Each night I heard small noises in the hallway. They weren't loud enough to be full whispers, but they sounded like soft, shaky breaths. It was almost like someone stood outside my room, trying not to be heard. Sometimes, I'd stay up with my ear pressed against the door. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. My hands would start to sweat. I tried to think of logical reasons for those sounds. Maybe old pipes or wind coming through a crack in a window. But it never felt like that. It felt like a presence. A few weeks later, I woke up around midnight because I felt something move on the bed. The sheets around me shifted like someone lay down on the other side. My chest felt tight, and I froze in place. My eyes were open, but the room was dark. I whispered, "Hello?" My voice shook. I reached out my arm, expecting to touch a body. My hand touched nothing. The bed was empty, but the weight on the mattress lasted for another 10 seconds. Then it vanished as if someone got up. I sat up and turned on the light. There was no one there. I stared at the spot, trying to find a dent on the sheet or some sign of a person. It looked normal. My breathing was rough and my hands trembled. I remember wiping sweat from my forehead. That night I barely slept. In the morning I found my door unlocked again. My parents were downstairs having coffee. I considered telling them but changed my mind at the last second. I thought maybe they would dismiss me or they'd worry too much. I decided to keep it to myself. Over time, the routine continued. Some nights I heard the doorknob rattle. Other times I heard that low whispering near the door. Always around midnight. The house was huge, and I explored many of the rooms during the day. I found old closets, dusty attics, and a basement with a low ceiling. My parents told me the previous owners left behind some furniture in the attic, but I never found anything interesting. Still, I felt uneasy in every corner of that place. Even during the day, it never felt warm or inviting. The silence was heavy, and it seemed to follow me around. One day I decided to check all the doors in the house. I went room by room, making sure each lock worked. I started with my bedroom, then moved on to the guest rooms, the kitchen door, and the back door. Everything seemed fine. At night, I locked my bedroom door and pulled on it a few times to be certain. Then I stayed awake, reading a magazine and waiting to see if the lock would change. Around 1 in the morning, I heard a scrape against the wood. It sounded like fingernails lightly touching the door from the outside. My arms tensed. I put the magazine down and got up. I tried to be silent. I placed my ear against the door and listened. I heard that soft whispering again. It sounded like slow, shaky breathing. My heart thumped hard and my throat felt dry. I wanted to fling the door open and see who was there, but I was afraid I'd find nothing. The idea of finding someone was scary, but the idea of finding nothing at all was worse. I waited for the sound to stop. After maybe a minute, I tested the lock. I turned it slowly. It was still locked. I stepped back, took a deep breath, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The overhead light was off, but I could see the faint glow from the bathroom nightlight at the end of the hall. No one was there. My chest felt tight, and my mouth felt dry. I checked the other rooms. Each door was locked. My parents' room was closed, and I heard my dad snoring inside. I stepped back to my bedroom, shut the door, and locked it again. I felt stupid, like I was chasing a ghost, but I couldn't ignore the tension in my stomach. A couple of weeks after that, I decided to sleep with headphones on. I thought if I couldn't hear the whispering, maybe I'd calm down. So I picked some music that helped me relax and tried to drift off. At first, it worked. I felt my muscles relax, and my mind started to wander. But around 2 in the morning, I woke up with a jolt. I didn't hear anything, but I felt something. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and the air felt cold. I turned over and saw my door standing half open. I had locked it. My heartbeat picked up and I yanked the headphones off. I sat up and stared at the door. I didn't see anyone, but the hallway light was on now. I knew I had turned it off earlier. My hands were shaking, and I felt a chill on the back of my neck. I got up and walked to the hallway. My feet felt heavy on the old floorboards. I stood there for a moment, looking left and right. Nobody was around. I switched off the light and closed my door again. I locked it one more time, pulling on it until it rattled. I got back in bed, but I couldn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, waiting for morning. At breakfast the next day, I tried to act normal. My parents talked about their plans for gardening. My mom wanted to plant flowers along the fence. My dad talked about repainting the living room. They both seemed calm. I glanced at them and wondered if they ever heard anything at night. They never mentioned it. I started to question my sanity. Maybe I was the only one experiencing these strange events. I considered telling them everything, but I kept hesitating. I didn't want to sound paranoid or childish. I also didn't want them to say it was just my imagination. That weekend, I took a closer look at the doors that had been unlocking themselves. My bedroom door had a simple lock, nothing fancy. I inspected the mechanism, turning the lock back and forth. It seemed normal. Then I went to the attic. It was dusty and the single light bulb hung from the ceiling. I moved a few boxes around, but I didn't see anything unusual. The only strange thing was a small old chair in the corner. I didn't recognize it. It had scratches on the seat. I didn't spend too long looking at it. The air in the attic felt stale and I started coughing. Over the next few nights, the same pattern repeated. I'd hear the soft whispers near my door, or I'd notice the door was unlocked by morning. Sometimes the bed felt like someone was on it. I never saw anyone. I never heard footsteps. It was always that faint whispering or the slight movement in the sheets. My heart rate was constantly elevated at night, and I stopped sleeping well. I'd wake up groggy, with dark circles under my eyes. My mom asked if I was feeling sick, and I just told her I had trouble adjusting to the new house. One night, I decided to confront whatever was happening. I stayed up late with my lamp on. I played a handheld video game to keep myself alert. Around midnight, I heard the doorknob rattle. I jumped to my feet and grabbed a baseball bat I kept by the bed. My legs felt shaky. I stood there staring at the doorknob. It moved slightly, like someone was testing it. My hand gripped the bat so hard my knuckles turned white. I called out, "Who's there?" The rattle stopped. I waited a few seconds, then unlocked the door and swung it open fast. The hallway was empty. My heart was pounding, and I felt adrenaline rushing through my body. I walked up and down the hall. The air felt cold against my bare arms. I checked the other rooms. All dark. I returned to my bedroom and locked the door again, but I didn't feel better. I sat awake until morning, listening to every tiny sound. After months of this, I started to get used to it in a strange way. I still felt scared, but I began to expect it. I'd brace myself every night, lock my door, and wait for the whispers. Some nights were calm and I'd sleep for a few hours. Other nights were worse and I'd hear the faint scratching or feel the bed dip again. I kept telling myself I just needed to hold on until I finished high school. I planned to move out as soon as I could. I tried to spend more time outside the house during the day. I'd go for walks or hang out at a friend's place. But every evening I returned to that quiet property. The house always seemed to swallow me up with its heavy silence. I never told my parents. Part of me thought they wouldn't believe it. Another part wanted to protect them from the same fear I felt. Life went on. They loved the quiet area. They decorated the living room and spent weekends tending the yard. I spent my time trying to stay calm at night. Occasionally I'd have a friend over, and we'd hang out in my room. I avoided sleepovers. I didn't want anyone to experience the noises or the doors unlocking on their own. I felt it was my personal problem. By the time I turned 18, I had accepted it as a part of my nightly routine. I'd lock the door, lie down, and wait. Sometimes I'd doze off without hearing anything. Other nights I'd jolt awake, heart racing, convinced someone was in the room. My parents never questioned it. I graduated high school and left for college soon after. Once I moved out, I hardly ever slept there. I visited on holidays, and I still felt uneasy whenever I walked down that hallway. Every so often, I'd stay the night, and I'd still hear those faint sounds outside my door. Sometimes the doorknob would move. Sometimes my door would be unlocked in the morning. It never really stopped. Looking back now, I wish I had told someone about it. But I didn't. I kept it to myself. I still remember the feeling of lying in bed, holding my breath, certain that something was right next to me. My chest would tighten, and sweat would collect under my arms. I'd press my hand to the mattress and feel that weight, but I never found a body. It felt like a constant sense of invasion. I never solved it, and I never found a culprit. I just learned to live with it. That house is still out there. My parents still own it. They say they enjoy the peace and quiet. I don't blame them. They never heard the whispers at night. Or maybe they did and never told me. Either way, I learned that silence can feel heavier than any amount of noise. I've moved on, but I'll never forget the nights I spent in that place. The memories are all about the darkness, the door that would unlock itself, and the soft, chilling whispers I never managed to explain. I'm not a superstitious person, but something in that old building makes me edgy. I work in a gift shop set up inside a house from the early 1900s. It's a 2-story place with creaky floors and narrow hallways. By day, it feels quaint. At night, it doesn't feel right. I hear noises, soft footsteps, and low murmurs from the second floor. There's nothing up there anymore. No stock, no offices, nothing. My coworker told me that boxes sometimes drop off shelves as if someone pushes them. The owner calls it an old building quirk. I don't buy it. My name's Eric. I've worked here for about 8 months. I started this job because I needed something stable, and the shop seemed like a quiet place. The front has a wide entrance with big windows for displays. The second floor used to be a living area when this was a house. It's mostly empty now, except for some old furniture in the corners. When I come in each morning, it's calm. Sunlight streams through the windows and the shop smells like scented candles. Customers browse novelty mugs, picture frames, or small figurines. They chat in low voices because it feels like a cozy nook. I'm usually the last one to leave at night. I close the register, turn off most of the lights, and lock the doors. The problem starts around that time. It's always after I switch off the main lights. The shop goes dim except for the fluorescent glow near the back. I stand at the counter, finalizing the receipts or counting the cash drawer, and I hear these muffled footsteps above my head. It's not a constant walk. It's more like short pacing. 3 or 4 steps, pause, then a few more steps. Sometimes I think I hear a voice, but it's never clear. Just a low sound that makes the hairs on my arms stand up. The first time I heard it, I thought it was the pipes or maybe the wind, but the sound is too distinct. I can't mistake it for normal building noise. It's the kind of thing that makes my stomach tighten. My hands start to sweat, and I glance around even though I know I'm alone. I look at the staircase in the back of the shop that leads upstairs. It's an old wooden staircase with chipped paint, and it squeaks if I put my foot on the first step. I've gone up there a few times to check, usually turning on the overhead light before climbing. I never found anyone. I see dusty floors with footprints, but I can't be sure if they're from me or from the person who restocks occasionally. I mentioned it to the owner once. His name is Calvin, and he's about 50. He gave me a half smile, shrugged, and said something like, "This place has its quirks, it's old." Then he changed the subject. He always does that. My coworker Sarah has more stories. She said that once she was rearranging some stuffed animals on a shelf, and one box slid off on its own. There was no one around, and she swears she didn't bump into it. A few days later, she was helping a customer when a different box fell. She tried to laugh it off, but it felt weird. About a month into my job, I got the closing shift every night. That's when I started noticing more strange stuff. Sometimes I'd set things in perfect order on the shelves. 15 minutes later, I'd find them on the floor or turned around. It's small stuff, but it adds up. One night I was stacking some small ceramic figures and I heard a soft thud behind me. I turned and a little box of gift tags was on the ground. It wasn't heavy, but it wasn't on the edge of the shelf either. It had been in the middle of a row. There was no draft or vibration that I could see. It was just on the ground about 2 feet from the shelf. I felt my pulse pick up. My hands got clammy. I looked around trying to see if someone was in the store playing a joke. Nobody else had a key that night and the doors were locked. My mind raced. I picked up the box, put it back, and hurried through the rest of my tasks. I turned off the lights and left faster than usual. Over time, these incidents became more frequent. I'd hear slow footsteps upstairs while I was balancing the register, or I'd hear a faint voice, a mumble that lasted a second or two. It never formed real words, at least not that I could make out. My heart would pound, and I'd feel a chill across my back. Sometimes I'd get goosebumps on my arms. I kept telling myself it was just an old building with creaky boards, that maybe I was tired or stressed. But it's hard to convince yourself of that when it happens again and again. One evening, Sarah and I were both closing. She was up front cleaning the display windows, and I was organizing some new stock in the back. The store was quiet except for our own shuffling. Then we both heard it at the same time, footsteps upstairs. We froze. I looked at Sarah. Her eyes were wide. She said, "Do you hear that?" I nodded. The steps moved across the length of the upstairs floor, then stopped. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then Sarah whispered, "You want to go check?" I took a flashlight from the back. My heart was thumping so loud I felt it in my ears. Sarah followed me to the staircase. I flicked on the overhead light. It's a dim light, so I still use the flashlight. The stairs creaked as I walked up. My mouth felt dry. I reached the top, scanning the hallway. There's a small landing, then 2 rooms on each side, and an old bathroom at the end. The doors were open, and it looked empty as usual. Nothing moved. Sarah stayed a few steps behind me, not saying anything. I walked into the first room. It still had an old wooden wardrobe and a dusty table near the window. The floor had some footprints in the dust, but they looked old. The second room was almost empty, just a couple of chairs piled in a corner. No sign of anyone. No place to hide, really. We checked the bathroom. The sink and toilet were covered in dust and didn't look like they'd been used in years. I felt a faint draft, but the windows were shut. Sarah sniffed the air and scrunched her nose. She said it smelled stale. I just wanted to get back downstairs. When we returned to the shop floor, we both felt uneasy. Sarah said, "I hate this part of the shift." I nodded, not sure what to say. We finished closing, and I walked out with her, locking the door behind us. We didn't talk much in the parking lot. I got in my car and went home, but the feeling stuck with me for a while. That night I lay awake, replaying the sounds in my head. A couple of weeks later, I had a rough night with extra inventory. We had a big shipment of holiday-themed items. I stayed behind to unpack them and put them on the shelves. It was past 9 when Sarah left. I told her I'd finish on my own. She gave me a sympathetic look, said goodnight, and left. After she was gone, it was just me. The shop was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. I started unboxing things in the back. Around 9:30, I heard something upstairs again. It was a single, heavy thump. It sounded like someone dropped a box or maybe kicked a piece of furniture. I stopped what I was doing and listened. Nothing after that. I tried to ignore it. My hands were trembling a bit. I kept pulling items from the shipping boxes. A few minutes later, I heard another sound. It was a soft dragging noise like something sliding across the floor. My chest tightened. I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the foot of the stairs. I noticed the overhead light was already on. I remembered turning it off earlier, but I thought maybe I'd left it on by mistake. I called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed. No response. I stood there for a few seconds thinking maybe I should just finish quick and go home. But curiosity got the better of me. I couldn't concentrate on work with that noise upstairs. I climbed the steps slowly, each step creaking under my weight. My breath was shaky. When I reached the top, the hallway was dim, but lit enough to see the doors. The first room was the same as before. Nothing looked different. The second room's door was slightly ajar, even though I remember leaving it fully open. I walked over and pushed it open. The chairs in the corner were the same. The rest of the room was bare, except for the dust on the floor. I stepped inside, aiming the flashlight around. Then I heard something behind me, in the hallway. A quick scrape on the floor. My heart pounded so hard I felt my ribs ache. I spun around and aimed the flashlight at the open door. I didn't see anyone. The hallway looked empty. I walked out again. I checked the bathroom. Nothing. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. I forced myself to breathe in and out. The place smelled musty. I felt a draft again on my left side, which made me shiver. I decided to head downstairs and finish fast. I turned off the overhead light, or I thought I did. I flicked the switch and the light went out. But as I took a step down, the light flickered back on behind me. I turned around, confused. The switch was in the off position, yet the bulb was glowing faintly. It wasn't bright. It was like a dull glow. Then it snapped off. Everything went dark except for my flashlight beam. I hurried down the stairs. My muscles felt tense, and I had a knot in my stomach. I started stuffing the leftover inventory on the shelves in no particular order. I didn't care anymore about neat displays, I just wanted to leave. I locked up the back door, turned off the main lights, and did a quick walkthrough. Right as I passed by the shelves of mugs, one of them toppled off and clattered to the floor. I jumped so hard I almost shouted. My throat felt tight. I picked up the mug, set it back, and noticed my hands were shaking. I locked the front door on my way out and double-checked it. I looked back at the building. The upstairs window was dark. I couldn't tell if anyone was there or not. The place felt oppressive, even from the outside. I walked to my car, got in, and turned on the engine. My heart rate was still high. I drove home with sweaty palms, replaying the flickering light and that dragging sound in my head. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal at work. During the daytime, customers filled the shop and the atmosphere felt harmless. I rearranged the displays, greeted people, and stayed busy. But every time I looked at the stairs, I felt uneasy. Sarah asked if I'd had any more weird experiences. I nodded. She sighed and said, "I'm not surprised." She told me she sometimes finds shelves rearranged in the morning, even though nobody was in the shop after closing. I confronted Calvin again. I told him that the noises and the boxes falling weren't random. He just smiled and said, "Eric, it's an old building. Weird stuff happens." He refused to talk more about it. I felt frustrated, but he's the boss. I left it alone. Last Friday, I got stuck closing again. It was around 8:30. and I was counting the cash drawer. Then I heard quick footsteps upstairs, like someone ran across the floor. That was new. I froze. My heart hammered. The footsteps sounded heavier than usual. I waited, listening. They stopped suddenly. The store was silent again. I considered going up, but I felt exhausted with the whole situation. Instead, I rushed through closing. I was about to switch off the final light when something slammed upstairs, like a door hitting a wall. I felt my stomach flip. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the staircase, more out of anger than bravery. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. I glared up into the dark. I decided I'd take one more look. I climbed the stairs, flipping the overhead switch. No flicker this time. It stayed on. The hallway was empty, the same as always. I noticed the door to the second room was closed. Earlier, it was open. I walked over, laid my hand on the doorknob, and pushed. It opened smoothly. Inside, the chairs were still in the corner. Dust coated the floor. I felt a slight breeze on my face, but the windows were shut. The hair on my neck stood up. I felt watched, even though I couldn't see anyone. I couldn't stand it anymore. I left the room, went back downstairs, grabbed my stuff, and left the shop. I locked up and practically ran to my car. On the drive home, I told myself I'd look for another job. I didn't like feeling tense every night. It wears you down. The next morning, Sarah texted me. She said that some boxes of new stock were on the floor when she opened the store. Nobody else had been inside after I locked up. She wanted to know if I knocked them over. I told her I hadn't touched them. She said she felt creeped out. I told her I was done investigating. I still work there, but I dread those closing shifts. The footsteps, the murmurs, the falling boxes, they keep happening. Sometimes I wonder if there's someone staying upstairs without permission, but there's no real evidence of that. Sometimes I wonder if it's something else, something I don't understand. But I don't look for answers. I go in, do my shift, and leave. That's all I can handle. Every night I feel that tightness in my chest when I switch off the lights. I hear those faint steps above me, pacing slowly. Sometimes I whisper under my breath, asking it to stop. It never does. When a box falls or a door slams, I jump. My pulse races, and I get out as soon as I can. Sarah says the same thing happens to her on the nights she closes. The owner still calls it things an old building does. Maybe he's right, or maybe he's ignoring the truth. I don't care anymore. I just count the register, turn off the lights, and try not to think too hard about the sounds. That's my routine now. It's the only way I can get through each shift without losing my nerve. I still don't believe in ghosts. Not really. But I know what I hear up there. I know the feeling I get when I look at that stairway. I don't need any fancy explanations. I just know it's real enough to make me sweat and shake. That's how my nights go in this old house turned gift shop, and I have no idea if anything will ever change. I just keep closing, counting my drawer, locking up, and hoping the footsteps don't follow me down the stairs. I never expected to feel so tense in such a picturesque setting. I was excited to be the best man at my friend's wedding, and I'd always imagined weddings at country estates as calm, cheerful events. But from the moment I set foot on that old colonial ranch, something felt off. The building looked ordinary from the outside, with tall windows, chipped paint, and wooden shutters. The main house had a large veranda with creaking boards underfoot. The guest rooms were in a converted stable area around the back. Everything seemed fine during the day, but at night I sensed something I couldn't ignore. I arrived the day before the wedding. My friend Marcus asked me to come early so we could go over last-minute details. The ranch was about an hour's drive from the nearest town, down a dusty road with a rusty gate at the entrance. The property was large, with a big gravel parking area and several old trees that stretched overhead. I parked my car in a spot near a wooden fence, grabbed my bag, and walked toward the main house. The air felt still. There were no loud birds or running water, just a slight breeze rustling the branches. Marcus stood by the front entrance, talking to some relatives. He waved me over, gave me a quick hug, and thanked me for showing up early. He looked tired. We had known each other since college, and I could tell he was on edge. Wedding stress seemed normal enough, but his eyes darted around whenever someone moved too quickly. His fiancée, Laura, came out from a side door at one point. She smiled at me, gave me a quick greeting, and disappeared again to handle some floral arrangement problems. Their day was packed with logistical stuff. Eventually, Marcus led me to my assigned guest room. It was in a separate building behind the main house, part of the older colonial structure. The hallway was narrow, with a low ceiling and small windows placed high on the walls. The light was dim. A weak bulb lit the corridor, so it was a bit hard to see clearly. The wooden floor creaked with every step, and there was a faint smell of dust and old wood. He opened the door to my room and we both stepped inside. It was small, with a single bed, a dresser, and a small table next to the bed. The mattress looked worn, and the sheets were plain white. There was a tiny lamp on the table and a closet that barely fit 2 suits. The walls were painted a dull cream color, and there was only one small window facing the courtyard. The glass on the window was old and slightly warped, making everything outside look a bit distorted. Nothing about the room screamed luxury, but I didn't mind at first. I was just happy to have a place to sleep. Marcus apologized for the simple accommodations, saying the ranch didn't have many upgraded rooms. He said, "I hope you don't mind. We put you here because it's closest to our suite. That way you can help me if anything comes up." I shrugged and said it was fine. He told me to drop by the main house when I was settled, and then he left me alone. As soon as the door closed, I felt a strange pressure in the room. It was subtle at first. The air felt thicker than before, and a slight chill spread along my neck. The overhead light was too dim for my taste, so I flicked on the lamp next to the bed. Its glow gave the room a warmer feel, but the corners of the room stayed in shadow. I noticed my hands felt cold, even though the day had been warm. I told myself it was just nerves. Weddings can bring a lot of tension, and sometimes I pick up on other people's stress. I put my bag on the bed, unzipped it, and started to hang my suit in the small closet. While I was opening the closet door, I heard a light scrape against the floor behind me. It sounded like a footstep or maybe the wooden boards settling. I paused, waiting to see if it would happen again. Nothing. I figured it was just old floorboards. I continued unpacking, though I kept glancing behind me. Later that evening, I joined Marcus and a few friends for dinner in the main house's dining room. We ate some simple home-cooked food provided by a local caterer. The conversation was lively, mostly about the wedding schedule and who would stand where. A few of us joked about how rural the location was. One person mentioned that older properties like this sometimes have odd histories, but no one elaborated. I noticed Marcus stiffening a bit during that part of the conversation, but he changed the subject quickly. When I got back to my room that night, the hallway seemed darker than before. The single light in the corridor flickered once or twice, casting strange shadows. I unlocked my door, walked in, and turned on the overhead light right away. The air felt stale and a little damp, but I blamed the old construction. I checked my phone for messages, responded to a few, then got ready for bed. I lay down, turned off the overhead light, and kept the small lamp on. The silence pressed in. I could hear my own breathing and the faint hum of the lamp's bulb. I must have dozed off at some point because I jerked awake in the middle of the night with my heart racing. I didn't remember any dreams, but I had this strong sense that someone had whispered my name. My mouth felt dry, and I could hear my heartbeat thudding in my ears. The lamp was still on, giving a dim glow to the bed. I glanced at the door. It was slightly open, maybe an inch or so. I remembered closing it all the way, but it definitely wasn't latched now. I sat up, swung my legs over the side of the bed, and stared at the gap in the doorway. My arms felt tense. I was breathing heavily, and a cold sweat had broken out on my forehead. I tried to stay calm. I listened for any sounds outside, but I only heard my own pulse. Then I saw a dark shape through the gap in the door. It was like a person standing there, not moving. I froze. My fingers gripped the edge of the mattress. I kept staring, waiting for the shape to move or say something. I wanted to call out, but my throat felt tight. After a few seconds, I reached for the lamp's switch and turned it up to its brightest setting. That's when I realized the shape wasn't there anymore. The gap in the door showed nothing but the dimly lit hallway beyond. No feet, no body, nothing. I got up, walked slowly to the door, and pulled it open. The hallway was empty and silent. A weak yellow light in the corridor revealed only the old wooden floor. There was no sign of anyone, no footsteps, and no noise coming from any other room. I stood there listening, feeling my heart pound. I closed the door again, but this time I checked the lock. It was a simple knob lock with no deadbolt. I twisted the knob back and forth to make sure it was secure. Then I looked around my room, checking the closet and under the bed. Everything was normal. There was nothing out of place. Still, my arms were covered in goosebumps and I felt like I was shaking from the inside. I decided to keep the lamp on. I lay back down, stared at the ceiling, and tried to convince myself that maybe I was half asleep and imagined the whisper. Maybe the door hadn't been fully closed and it drifted open on its own. I didn't fully believe these explanations, but I needed to calm myself enough to sleep. Eventually, I drifted off again, though I slept lightly, waking up every hour or so to check the door. The next morning, I felt groggy and irritable. My back was stiff from tossing and turning. I got dressed and walked to the main house to grab some breakfast. I ran into Marcus in the hallway. He took one look at me and asked, "You sleep okay?" I shrugged and told him I'd had a rough night, then asked if anyone had knocked on my door or called me during the night. He gave me a puzzled look and said, "No. Everyone crashed pretty early and I stayed up in the lounge with a few people. Nobody mentioned going over to your room." I wandered into the dining area where a small buffet was laid out. While I was pouring myself some coffee, I asked a few other guests if they'd been near the guest rooms in the night. They all said no, looking just as confused as Marcus did. One guy joked that maybe I was hearing ghosts, but he laughed it off as soon as he said it. No one else seemed to notice anything odd during the night. The day went on with the usual wedding preparations. Laura was busy adjusting decorations in a side garden, and Marcus was finalizing details for the ceremony. I spent most of the day helping move chairs, setting up the sound equipment, and checking on last-minute errands. I tried to shake off the weird feeling from the night before, but I couldn't. The memory of that dark figure in my doorway stayed in my mind. My neck felt tight when I thought about it. During the afternoon, I got a chance to explore the property a bit. I walked around the older parts of the ranch, noticing the thick brick walls, the old wooden doors with iron handles, and a few stables that were empty except for some old straw. The floors were uneven and some of the windows had cracks in the glass. Everything looked worn out but still functional. Occasionally, I caught a faint musty smell that seemed to come from the corners of the building. I tried to push aside my anxiety, telling myself it was just an old place with poor ventilation. That evening, the rehearsal dinner took place in a small courtyard with an open-air setup. Twinkle lights were strung up between posts and the caterer served grilled meat, salads, and bread. People were laughing, sipping drinks, and getting excited for the next day's ceremony. I tried to enjoy myself, but I felt on edge, worried about returning to my room. When I finally headed back to the room, it was late. The corridor light was still flickering every now and then. I walked down the hallway, turned my key in the door, and took a breath before going inside. The air was stale again, but everything looked the same as I'd left it. I made a point of testing the door, making sure it shut tight and latched properly. I flicked the overhead light on, along with the lamp. I checked the closet and looked under the bed again, feeling a little ridiculous but not caring. My nerves were shot. I sat on the bed, scrolling through my phone, hoping some mindless browsing would take my thoughts off the previous night. After about half an hour, my eyes started to droop. I got under the covers, left the lamp on, and tried to sleep. It took a long time for me to relax. Every creak made me tense up, and the hum of the lamp seemed louder than before. Eventually, exhaustion took over. Sometime in the early hours, I woke again. This time, I heard what sounded like a soft knock on the door. Just 2 light taps, as if someone was testing if I was awake. My eyes snapped open and I felt that cold sweat break out again. My heart pounded in my chest. I swallowed hard, looked at the door, and saw it was still closed. I stayed quiet, waiting to see if the knocks would continue. About a minute passed. No more knocks. But then, very faintly, I thought I heard someone whisper my name again. It wasn't clear, but it sounded close. I forced myself to get up. I walked over to the door with my feet almost dragging. My breath felt shaky, and my hand was trembling when I reached for the knob. I opened the door fast, hoping to catch whoever was there off guard. The hallway was empty. I stepped into the corridor wearing only my t-shirt and shorts. I looked around. The other doors were closed and no one was in sight. The corridor light flickered once, then stayed on. I felt a chill run over my arms. My legs felt weak, like I was ready to run but had nowhere to go. I whispered, "Hello?" But only silence came back. After a few seconds, I stepped back inside and locked the door. I climbed into bed, my heart hammering. I kept the lamp on again. After lying awake for a while, I must have drifted off from sheer exhaustion. Morning came, and I felt even worse than before. I got dressed and made my way to the main house to help with the wedding preparations. Everyone was busy setting up flowers, chairs, and tables. Marcus was going over the schedule with the wedding planner. I waited until he finished, then pulled him aside and told him about the knocks. He said no one had any reason to visit my room that night, and he hadn't heard anything. He seemed concerned but also distracted by the wedding. I didn't want to add to his stress, so I tried to act like I was fine. The wedding ceremony went off smoothly. I stood next to Marcus in my suit, watched him exchange vows with Laura, and joined the celebration. The ranch looked beautiful in the late afternoon light, and everyone seemed happy. People danced in the courtyard, ate dinner, and took photos by a nearby tree. I tried to get into the spirit, but I couldn't stop glancing at the building where my room was located. As the reception wound down, some guests left to stay in hotels in town, and others stayed in different guest rooms in the main house. I was stuck in that same small room. I considered sleeping in my car, but that seemed extreme. I also thought about asking if another room was available, but everything was booked. I tried to rationalize that maybe the stress of the wedding had me on edge, or maybe I was half awake and hearing ordinary house noises. But the memory of that dark figure in the doorway kept bothering me. That third night, I almost expected something else to happen, but nothing did. I slept lightly, with the lamp on, and only woke up once around 2 a.m., hearing what I thought was a scraping noise in the corridor. When I peeked outside, everything was still. I eventually fell back asleep. In the morning, most of the guests were packing up. Marcus and Laura were heading off on their mini honeymoon, and I had to drive back home. Before I left, I told Marcus I'd had a strange experience in that room. He said he was sorry, and that maybe the ranch was older than it looked. We said our goodbyes, and I walked out to my car. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as soon as I left the property. The drive down the dusty road felt long, but I was glad to see the main highway again. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that guest room. I clearly heard whispers, and I'm certain I saw a shadowy figure outside my door. No one at the ranch admitted to knocking or calling me. I don't know if the place was haunted or if I was just overly tense. But I do know I've never felt that kind of heaviness in a room before. Even though the wedding was a happy event overall, that small piece of it still lingers in my mind. Every time I think of that ranch, I remember the cold sweat, the open door, and the dark shape that vanished when I turned on the light. I don't think I'll ever forget it. I never expected to find anything strange on that small piece of land. I bought a simple house in a modest neighborhood, hoping for a quiet life. My plan was just to fix it up little by little, enjoy a small backyard with a few banana plants, and keep to myself. Things didn't go that way. On my third week there, I heard a high-pitched laugh at night. It sounded distant at first, almost like a breeze, but it was real enough to get my nerves on edge. I stopped what I was doing and listened. It stopped. I shrugged it off. A few days later it happened again, only this time there was also a muffled sob. I felt my skin crawl. There was no one in my yard, at least no one I could see. It got worse from there. I'm a simple guy, not into fancy talk or big expressions. I usually mind my own business. I'd moved to this place because it was affordable and had some history. One evening, while I was out back removing weeds, my neighbor leaned over the fence for a chat. He's a friendly man named Humberto. I asked if he had any visitors or family members staying over, maybe someone who liked to hang out in the backyard late at night. He looked at me like I was asking something crazy. He said no. Then he asked me if I knew about my property's past. I said I only knew there was an old building there a long time ago. He nodded slowly. That was the first time he told me it had been an orphanage. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to pry. I never thought the previous use of the land would matter. But over the next few weeks I realized something lingered there, and it rattled me. The first few nights after I learned about the orphanage, I tried to stay calm. I reasoned that maybe I was just hearing random noises. The banana plants made weird rustling sounds in the wind. Stray animals sometimes wandered through. I brushed off the laughter and sobbing as my imagination, or maybe the neighbor's TV. But I couldn't ignore it when I woke up one morning, stepped onto my small front porch, and noticed multiple dirt footprints. They were small, definitely not matching the size of my shoes or any adult I knew. I tried to measure them with my hand. They were shorter than my palm. I stood there, heart thumping, wondering who or what made them. The porch was dusty, and the footprints led to the edge where my yard ended, then disappeared. I thought about knocking on Humberto's door again, but I felt embarrassed. Who wants to admit they're scared of footprints that don't match any shoes around? Instead, I grabbed a rag, wiped the prints away, and mumbled to myself about stray dogs or something else that might cause small tracks. But dogs don't leave prints shaped like a human foot. I paced around my living room for a while, feeling my stomach tighten. My mind went in circles. Eventually, I forced myself to move on with my day. I went to the hardware store for some paint and new locks, trying to keep myself busy. That night, I settled into bed around 10. It was quiet for an hour. Then I heard the same high-pitched laughter from the backyard. It echoed in the darkness. My chest tightened, and I felt a bead of sweat roll down my temple. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside. The banana plants swayed in the breeze, their big leaves rustling. I saw nothing but damp grass and a few fallen leaves. The laughter stopped as soon as I stepped off the porch. I waved the flashlight around. The only sounds were insects and my own breathing. I went back inside. My hands were shaking, and my back felt tense. The next few days followed a similar pattern. I'd go to work, try to maintain a normal life, come home, and feel anxious as evening approached. Sometimes I heard the muffled sobbing in the backyard. Sometimes I caught a faint, high-pitched giggle. And every few days there were those small footprints again, always in the morning. They appeared on the porch, near the banana plants, or even by the side of the house where I kept my trash bins. No matter where I found them, they always vanished at the edges, as if whatever made them walked right back into the dirt or the grass. I couldn't ignore this. I asked Humberto if there was a chance anybody was sneaking around our properties at night. He looked at me seriously and said he never saw anyone. He had motion sensor lights, and they never switched on except when a stray cat passed by. I mentioned the small footprints again, and he gave me a weary look. He said he's heard rumors about odd noises ever since he moved in years ago. He never saw anyone, though. He hinted that I should be careful. He paused for a while, scratched his chin, and added that the land had a strange reputation. I wanted more specifics, but he shut down. I saw his face go stiff, like he'd said more than he intended. That night, I decided to try something different. I set up a cheap camera on the porch. I placed it so it pointed toward the banana plants and left the porch light on low. I wanted to catch whoever was messing around. I sat inside with my curtains partly open, occasionally glancing out. It was quiet until around midnight. My eyelids got heavy, and I was about to doze off on the couch when I heard the laughter again. It was faint, like it came from the far side of the yard. My heartbeat sped up. I looked through the window. I saw no movement, but I felt my throat tighten with fear. I realized my hands were sweating. After a few minutes, the laughter died down. Then came a low, muffled sobbing sound. I couldn't pinpoint where it came from, but it was definitely in the yard. I sat there, heart pounding, waiting for something to show up in the camera's view. Nothing happened for the next half hour. No shadows, no shapes, just the leaves waving. Finally, the noise stopped. I forced myself to relax and eventually fell asleep on the couch, the flashlight still in my hand. The next morning, I rushed outside to check the camera's SD card. I played back the footage on my laptop. It showed my dimly lit porch and part of the yard. I could see some rustling in the banana plants, but it was too dark to make out anything clearly. Then, for about 3 seconds, I saw something that made my stomach turn. In the corner of the frame, there was a quick movement like a small shape darting across. It was too blurry to identify. I froze the video and tried to enlarge the frame, but it was pixelated. The shape looked small, maybe knee-high, but that was all I could gather. It moved from one side to the other in half a second. Then it was gone. I stared at my screen, jaw tight. This wasn't my imagination. Something was really in the yard. I didn't know if it was an animal or a person, but the shape looked too upright to be a typical stray dog or cat. I felt uneasy. My pulse quickened. I decided I had to talk to someone else in the neighborhood. Maybe Humberto wasn't comfortable giving me more details, but there had to be another neighbor who knew more. I went 2 houses down and found an older man watering his lawn. I introduced myself. He was polite, but as soon as I mentioned the orphanage, he shifted uncomfortably. I asked if he ever heard strange noises at night. He said no, but he never stayed up late. He said the property had some old stories attached to it, but didn't elaborate. His eyes flicked away when I pressed for more. He just told me, in a quiet tone, to avoid going out alone after dark. Then he excused himself and went inside. I felt a chill. My stomach was in knots. In the following nights, the sounds continued. One night, I got brave. Around 11, I put on some boots, grabbed my flashlight, and went straight for the banana plants. I moved the leaves aside, shined the light between them, and checked the ground. It was moist, and I spotted 2 partial footprints near the base of one large trunk. They were small like all the others, and I could see fresh droplets of water around them. It smelled like wet earth. I felt my muscles tense. My mind started racing. I swung the flashlight around the rest of the yard. There was no one there, just a light breeze and the rustle of leaves. When I stepped back onto the porch, I noticed my breathing was rapid. My palms felt clammy. My eyes darted around, expecting something to jump out at me. I made sure all my windows were locked, drew the curtains, and stayed in my living room for the rest of the night. I kept the lights on, my ears tuned to every small sound. Around 2 in the morning, I dozed off. I jolted awake to a faint sobbing sound. It was closer this time, almost as if it was right under the open window. My heart hammered in my chest. I stayed still, not daring to peek outside. Eventually, the sound faded. At work the next day, I couldn't concentrate. I kept replaying the events in my head. I wanted to tell someone, but I was afraid they'd call me crazy. People tend to dismiss weird accounts like that, so I just kept it to myself and tried to focus on my tasks, though my hands kept trembling whenever I thought about it. I left the office as soon as I could and went home. Part of me wanted to sell the place and leave, but I'd invested too much already, and I didn't want to give up yet. I considered inviting a friend to stay over, but I wasn't sure how to explain it. My pride got in the way. Instead, I spent the evening cleaning the yard, trimming the banana plants, and installing a second outdoor light near the fence. By the time I finished, I was worn out. I ate a quick dinner of rice and beans, then settled into the living room again, determined to stay awake. Around midnight, the laughter came back. It started soft, then rose in pitch. My back tightened. I flicked on the porch light from the inside and glanced out through the curtains. I saw nothing. The sound continued, drifting around the side of the house. I grabbed my flashlight. but my legs felt heavy. My gut told me to stay put, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I opened the door slowly and stepped onto the porch. The night air was thick, and my heart pounded. The sound seemed to dance around me, first near the banana plants, then near the fence. I followed it with the flashlight, but I couldn't see anything. After a minute or two, it just stopped. I looked down and saw fresh footprints on the porch, heading right toward my front door. They were clear, made of damp soil. The shapes were small, just like before. My mind raced. I felt fear creeping up my spine. It was the same kind of tension you get when you sense someone behind you, but there's no one to see. I turned around quickly. Nothing. My breath came in short bursts. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and stepped back inside, locking the door behind me. I barely slept that night. In the morning, I checked everything. The footprints were still there, now dried and smudged. I took pictures with my phone, though I felt strange doing it. They looked almost like a person's prints, just smaller. I tried to match my own foot next to them, and there was no comparison. Mine was at least 2 sizes bigger in length. That day, I decided to talk to Humberto one more time. Maybe he knew some detail that could explain this. He listened patiently as I described what was happening. I could see him tensing up. Then he told me that people around here always heard strange sounds at night. Some folks said they saw shapes or silhouettes near the banana plants. Others found footprints or muddy smears on walls, but no one ever talked about it openly. It was like an unspoken rule. People simply lived with it or ignored it. He said the orphanage had closed decades ago, and after that the property changed hands many times until it was demolished. Nobody built anything else on that spot until my little house went up. When I pressed for more information, Humberto just shrugged. He said he only knew rumors, nothing concrete. He avoided looking me in the eye and ended the conversation abruptly. I thanked him and went back home. I stood on my porch staring at the banana plants. My frustration was building and my nerves were shot. I'd never experienced anything like this. I couldn't figure out if I was dealing with someone playing games or something else. There were no footprints that day, though. The yard stayed silent during daylight hours. At night, the cycle continued. Laughter, sobbing, small footprints. After a couple more weeks, I decided I had to make a choice. Either I'd keep living with this strange activity or I'd leave. So far, I hadn't been harmed. I never found any damage to the property, aside from the unnerving footprints. No one broke my windows or doors. I just felt constantly on edge. I started double-checking the locks every hour. I kept all the lights on at night. I even stopped using the bedroom because I felt too isolated in there. Instead, I slept on the couch, or tried to. I'd jolt awake at every small sound. Eventually, I scheduled a visit with the realtor to discuss my options. But selling so soon would be a huge loss. I also worried that wherever I went, I'd remember these experiences. Something about this place clung to me. I'd poured money into renovations and yard work. I liked the neighbors despite their evasive attitude, and part of me wanted to understand what was really happening. As of now, I'm still here. The nights remain tense. Sometimes the sobbing is soft, sometimes the laughter is loud. Sometimes there are footprints, other times there's just a hint of movement in the dark. I can't explain it with facts. All I know is that I hear and see things that don't match the normal routine of a quiet neighborhood. Humberto keeps his distance, but he greets me politely. The other neighbors rarely make eye contact when I'm outside. It's as if everyone is aware, but nobody wants to talk about it. I live day by day. I focus on work. I come home and brace myself for the night. My heart still races whenever I see new footprints or hear that high-pitched laughter in the distance. My nerves are raw and I'm tired. There's no conclusion to this story right now. I get up in the morning, look around my yard, check for footprints, then go about my business. The sun makes everything seem normal. But once the moon comes up, I feel that tightness in my chest. I keep a flashlight in one hand and my phone in the other. I question every sound and shadow. I try to hold on to logic. I wonder if I'll ever get real answers. Until that happens, I remain here, listening and looking, hoping that one day the footsteps and the laughter will disappear. I'll never forget the first time I noticed something strange about that old piano. I had set it up in my living room just a few days earlier, and I was already regretting the decision. The seller practically handed it to me for free, saying it had been in his basement for years. I only wanted a cheap way to learn a few songs. I didn't expect it to keep me awake at night or make me question my own sanity. But by the third night, I was checking every corner of my home, heart pounding, certain I wasn't alone. I bought the piano on a rainy afternoon. The guy had it pushed against a wall in his dimly lit basement. He looked relieved when I agreed to take it off his hands. He said, "If you can pay for the movers, it's all yours." I agreed on the spot. It was heavy, with dark wooden panels and a dull finish. The keys looked dusty, and a few were chipped around the edges. The bench had a padded seat with the material torn at one corner. I didn't think much of it. I just saw an old piece of furniture that needed some care. When the movers set it down in my living room, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I even wiped the keys with a cloth and tested a few notes. The sound was uneven, but not bad for something that had sat in a basement for who knows how long. I decided to order some basic piano lesson books online. I figured I'd teach myself a few songs over the next couple of months. At that point, I had no idea what I was bringing into my house. The first night, I thought I heard a faint sound around 2 in the morning. It was just a short series of clicks and creaks. I chalked it up to the house settling, or maybe the piano's wood adjusting to the warmer temperature in my living room. I tried to go back to sleep, ignoring the weird feeling that something was off. By the time I got up in the morning, I had mostly forgotten about it. On the second night, I woke up again at nearly the same time. The noise was a little louder this time. I sat up in bed, listening. It sounded like someone lightly running their fingers across the keys, not pressing them enough to make a real note, but enough to cause a faint clicking. I stayed in bed for a while, holding my breath, trying to figure out if I was dreaming. After a minute or two, it stopped. I stared at the clock, heart pounding, until I finally convinced myself it was just the wood expanding. The third night is when I got really spooked. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water around midnight. As I passed by the living room, I noticed the piano bench wasn't aligned the way I had left it. I always leave it centered under the keyboard, but now it was slightly to the right. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I bumped it earlier or just hadn't paid attention. I went back to bed, but it took me a while to doze off. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to the distinct sound of a key being pressed. I couldn't tell which note it was, but it was definitely the piano. I felt a surge of adrenaline. My mouth went dry, and my heart thumped in my chest. I tried to stay calm. I thought maybe a draft or some internal mechanism caused a single key to fall. But then I heard another key, and then another. Soft, random, like someone testing them. I got out of bed slowly, grabbed the first heavy thing I could find, a flashlight, and made my way to the living room. The hallway felt colder than usual. My arms were tense. My legs felt shaky. When I reached the living room, I saw the piano lid over the keys was open. I was sure I had closed it. I also noticed the bench seat was lifted as if someone had been checking inside. That was the moment I felt a real sense of dread. I just stood there, gripping the flashlight, staring at the piano. No one else was in the room. The windows were locked, the front door was locked, and the back door was still bolted. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I walked over to the piano, closed the bench seat, and lowered the lid over the keys. Then I checked every corner of my living room, flicking on all the lights. I looked behind the couch, behind curtains, even in the closet. Nothing was out of place except that piano. I finally sat down on the couch, breathing hard, trying to calm myself. My hand was trembling when I put down the flashlight. I considered calling the seller, asking if he'd ever experienced anything weird with this thing, but I realized it was almost 3 in the morning. I decided to wait. That night I barely slept. Every noise in the house made me jump. My mind kept looping back to the image of the open bench seat. Why would it be open? The next day, I called the seller. I asked if there was anything about the piano I should know, any quirks, any mechanical issues. He just said he had inherited it from a relative and that it sat in his basement untouched for years. He claimed he never heard anything strange. I didn't get the sense he was lying. I figured there had to be some logical explanation. I tried to ignore it and focus on actually learning the piano. I opened one of the beginner books and practiced simple scales. My left hand was clumsy, but it felt good to make some progress. The keys had a stiff action, but they produced a deep, resonant tone. I started to warm up to the piano's sound. I even told myself that maybe the weird events were in my head. But every night, something happened. On the fourth night, I found the bench moved away from the piano like someone had shoved it back. On the fifth night, a single key was stuck down, as if it had been held too long. On the sixth night, I heard what sounded like short melodies, though they were broken and discordant. Each time I'd rush out and there'd be no one in the living room. The lid would be open or the bench seat would be lifted. I started to feel uncomfortable in my own home, especially once the sun went down. I began locking my bedroom door. That made me feel slightly safer, but I still woke up with my heart racing at the slightest sound. During the day, everything seemed normal. I even invited a friend over to see if maybe I was imagining things. He played a few chords, commented on how the piano was out of tune, and that was it. I didn't mention the nighttime events. I could tell he wouldn't believe me if I did. By the end of the first week, I was exhausted. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, and I found myself jumping at small sounds like the fridge kicking on or the pipes groaning. I started to check the piano before going to bed, making sure everything was closed, the bench was in place, the keys were all up. I felt like I was babysitting a piece of furniture. It didn't make sense to me, but I couldn't deny that I heard those keys at night. On the eighth night, I decided to stay up and watch the piano. I turned off all the lights, sat in the far corner of the living room, and waited. My plan was to keep still and see if anything moved on its own. I had a thermos of coffee next to me, and I checked the time on my phone every 5 or 10 minutes. For the first hour, nothing happened. My legs started to cramp. I heard the clock ticking in the kitchen. Occasionally, I stretched my back and glanced around. I began to doze off around 2 a.m., but then I heard it. A single note, very soft. My eyes snapped open, and my breath caught in my throat. I stared at the piano. The lid was still closed. The bench seat was down. Then I heard another key. My heart pounded. I wondered if I should switch on the light, but I wanted to see if anything physically moved. I stayed still, trying not to make a sound. Suddenly, I saw the lid lift slightly, as if pushed from underneath. It rose maybe 3 or 4 inches, then settled back down. I felt a surge of fear in my chest. My palms got sweaty, and I nearly dropped my phone. I forced myself to get up. My body felt heavy and tense. I took slow steps across the living room, my eyes locked on the piano. I reached out and touched the lid. It was solid wood, not loose. I lifted it fully to check the keys underneath, but nothing was out of place. The bench seat was closed too. I looked inside the bench and saw some old sheet music, that was all. I felt a chill run through me, and I realized I was shaking. I didn't know what else to do. I snapped on the lamp next to the couch and stood there, breathing fast, scanning the room for any sign of movement. There was none. After a few minutes, I decided to close the piano lid, turn off the lamp, and go back to my corner to wait longer. I stayed until dawn, but nothing else happened. In the morning, I felt like a wreck. I drank too much coffee, paced around the house, and kept checking the piano. I tried to tell myself it must be some weird trick of the wood or maybe a small draft that lifted the lid. But deep down, I knew it was something else. I thought about listing the piano online and getting rid of it, but I also felt strange about giving it away. I didn't want to pass this problem on to someone else. Another night passed with the usual pattern of random notes around 2 a.m. I lay there, eyes open, feeling my heart thud in my chest. I let it happen, too frightened to move. Then the next morning, I walked into the living room and found the bench seat open again. The old sheet music inside was scattered, like someone had flipped through it. I closed it and decided I had to do something. I couldn't keep losing sleep and feeling terrified in my own home. I called a local piano tuner, hoping maybe he could explain something about the piano's internal mechanisms. He arrived one afternoon, tested the keys, opened the top panel, and looked inside. He said it was dusty, a bit rusty in places, but structurally fine. Nothing about it suggested that any keys would move on their own. He tightened a few strings, replaced one that was worn out, and left after about an hour. I felt a brief sense of relief, but that night, the noise continued. Eventually, I decided to stay somewhere else. I packed a bag and spent a night at a friend's place. For the first time in over a week, I slept through the night without hearing any clicking keys. When I returned the next morning, I found the living room just as I had left it, except for the fact that the bench seat was open and the piano lid was raised. I stood there, my heart sinking, realizing this wasn't going to stop on its own. I called the seller one last time, asking if there was any history to the piano. He insisted he knew nothing beyond the fact that it came from a relative's estate. I asked him if he wanted it back, and he laughed nervously. He said no. I decided then that I'd try to sell it or give it away, just like he had. I reasoned that maybe someone else would view it as an interesting novelty, or maybe they wouldn't experience the same issues. I posted an online ad. Antique upright piano, free to a good home. You must arrange transportation. Within a day, I had several inquiries. One guy came by to take a look. I let him play a few notes and he seemed satisfied. I didn't mention the noises at night. I figured he'd find out for himself if they continued. He left a deposit to pay the movers. I agreed to let it go as soon as possible. That final night with the piano, I slept in my bedroom, door locked, feeling both guilty and relieved. Around 2 a.m., I heard the faint plinking of notes. I covered my ears with a pillow, tried to control my breathing, and waited for morning. At first light, I walked into the living room. The lid was open. The bench seat was raised. That was the last time I had to see it like that. The movers came in the afternoon. They loaded the piano onto their truck without much fuss. As they drove away, I felt a rush of relief. My living room looked empty with that big space now bare, but the tension in my chest started to ease. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat on the couch. The silence felt strange. It took me a few days to stop expecting to hear those keys in the middle of the night. I still wonder if the new owner experienced the same late-night disturbances. Part of me hopes he didn't. Part of me thinks he did, but I don't plan to ask. I'm just glad I can finally sleep without listening for those quiet, eerie notes that used to pull me out of my dreams and fill my mind with dread. Now, when I think about learning the piano, I consider taking lessons somewhere else, maybe on a digital keyboard that I can turn off. I'm done with old, haunted furniture. My nerves can't take it anymore. I felt a jolt in my gut the moment I saw those Victorian dolls at the thrift store. They were stuffed into a faded cardboard box. The box looked like it had been dragged across a dirty floor for years. I hadn't gone there looking for dolls, but I spotted the delicate faces and the old-fashioned dresses as soon as I stepped inside. I couldn't ignore them. I ended up buying the entire set without even bargaining. I told myself I could use them in a photo series. That's what I do. I run a small photography studio out of a warehouse I rent on the edge of the city. I like unusual props, and these dolls seemed perfect. I had no idea they would turn my week into a mess of headaches, weird sounds, and the worst flu I've had in years. The day I bought them, I carried the box straight to my car. I coughed as I lifted it because a plume of dust blew out. My eyes watered and my nose itched. The cashier laughed a bit when she saw me choke on the dust. She said, "Those things have been back there forever." She gave me a tight smile. I paid, thanked her, and left. On the drive, I felt a little uneasy. The dolls had these painted eyes that seemed to glare at me every time I glanced at them in the rearview mirror. I kept looking back at them while stopped at red lights, noticing their chipped paint and ragged lace dresses. Some had hair made of yarn. Others had hair that felt like coarse straw. A couple had missing fingers or broken toes. Their worn-out condition added to the charm, I guess. I got to my studio around mid-afternoon. I lugged the box inside and set it down on a wooden table near my photography backdrop. I had a few other projects going on, so I didn't get around to the dolls right away. I kept them in that box for a few days, occasionally glancing over at them while I worked on editing photos on my computer. One time I swear I caught a slight movement, but it could have been a trick of the light or my eyes being tired. I told myself it was nothing. The day after that, I felt some pressure in my ears whenever I got close to the table. It felt like I was diving underwater, that weird sensation that you have to yawn or swallow to release. I shrugged it off. I thought maybe I just had some sinus pressure from the changing weather. By the end of the week, I had a raging cough, a pounding headache, and a fever that wouldn't quit. I curled up in a corner of the studio, resting against a stack of blankets I keep there. My throat felt raw. My nose wouldn't stop running. I canceled a couple of client meetings because I couldn't focus. The cough got worse every time I tried to stand up or talk. I used cough drops. I drank water. Nothing helped. Even my ears throbbed. That pressure got worse whenever I was near the dolls. When I tried to work at my desk, which was only a few steps from the table with the box, the dull ache in my head turned into sharp stabs. It made it hard to look at my computer screen. I couldn't sleep well at night because every time I dozed off, I heard a faint buzzing or whispering. It sounded like someone muttering from the far corner of the room. I started to think I was paranoid. I told myself it was the fever causing mild hallucinations. I told myself I just needed rest and maybe some actual medicine. On the fourth night, I woke up sweating. My body ached, and I could barely swallow. I checked the clock. It was almost 3 in the morning. I heard a soft shuffle near the table. I forced myself to sit up, even though my chest burned with every breath. I turned on a small lamp. The box with the dolls was still there, the flaps open. I counted the dolls. 1, 2, 3, 8 total. They were all in place, or so it seemed. Each face stared up at the ceiling. I felt shaky, but I convinced myself it was just me being sick. The next morning, I decided I had to do something. I intended to sell them online, or at least to an antiques dealer. I took a few test shots with my camera to see if they would look interesting enough for a listing. But every time I lined them up, I felt that same heavy pressure in my ears. My headache flared up, and I found myself clearing my throat constantly. I gave up on photos and decided I'd try to clean them first, hoping a better appearance would make them sell faster. I set up a small station near the sink at the back of the studio. I brought over a container of mild soap, a soft brush, and a towel. I picked up the first doll. Its face had chipped porcelain, and its eyes were glassy. I ran a cloth over its hair. The hair felt rough and smelled stale, like old fabric kept in a damp box for years. As I pressed the cloth into the doll's scalp, I thought I heard a tiny whisper. It was so faint, I couldn't make out any words. I froze. My heart pounded. My breathing quickened. I set the doll down, told myself it was just static in my ears. I tried again. I picked up the second doll, which had woolen yarn for hair. The instant my fingers brushed the fibers, I heard that whisper again. It felt closer, like someone was standing right behind me. I spun around expecting to see someone. The studio was silent except for the hum of the mini fridge in the corner. I felt a chill run down my neck. My hands shook. I had trouble focusing on the act of cleaning. I felt like my heart was racing too fast and I had a hard time steadying my breath. I managed to wash the faces of 2 dolls. I gently dabbed at their dirty lace collars and rinsed off some ancient grime. The water turned gray in the sink. My eyes stung from the dust and from the strain of trying to keep calm. I kept checking over my shoulder, half convinced I'd see someone standing in the shadows. I felt my ears pop again, the same pressure I'd felt all week. The third doll made me even more uneasy. Its glass eyes looked crooked, like they were off-center. I brushed its hair and heard a faint exhale or something that sounded like a breath. It came from right in front of me. I dropped the doll in the sink. The porcelain clacked against the metal. My throat locked up and I gagged. I looked around, trying to see if there was a vent or pipe making noise, but it sounded too much like a human breath. I moved back to the main area of the studio, leaving the third doll in the sink. I felt hot, even though I was shivering. My fever hadn't gone down, and I was sure this wasn't helping. I sat down on a metal stool. I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to calm down. My hands were trembling, and I felt a pounding in my temples. I thought about calling someone for help, but I didn't know who to call for something like this. A friend would tell me I was just sick. A doctor would tell me to rest. I stared at the dolls still in the box. A few had slight smiles, a few had blank expressions. One had a cracked cheek. I stared at that crack for a while, feeling my pulse in my ears. I forced myself to continue cleaning them. I told myself it was just my imagination. The sooner I got them cleaned, the sooner I could list them for sale. I'd pack them up and never look at them again. I went back to the sink, picked up the doll I'd dropped. I felt a little numb at that point. I washed it quickly. My hands felt clumsy. I didn't bother being gentle. I just wanted to get the grime off. Every now and then, I heard that faint murmur again, but I ignored it. I moved faster. I washed the rest of the dolls in silence. By the time I finished, my shirt was soaked with sweat. My head felt like it weighed a ton. I loaded them all back into the box, still damp, and put the box on a table near the front door. My plan was to let them dry and then take them home or mail them off somewhere. I didn't care where they ended up. I took a break, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, and collapsed into a folding chair. My breath was shallow and I felt a stinging pain in my sinuses. My fever was spiking again. I decided I couldn't stay in the studio. I needed real rest. But before leaving, I covered the box with a heavy towel. I didn't want to look at those dolls anymore. I turned off most of the lights, locked the door, and walked to my car. Even outside in the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was right behind me. I glanced over my shoulder twice. No one was there. I got in my car and drove straight to my apartment. My fever got worse that night, and I slept for almost 12 hours. The next day, I felt a bit better physically, but I had zero desire to go back to my studio. My mind wandered, picturing those dolls under the towel. I kept imagining them sitting up, pushing the towel away, or whispering to each other. I told myself I was being ridiculous. There's no logic in dolls talking on their own. But I couldn't deny what I'd heard in my own ears, or at least what I thought I'd heard. By late afternoon, I forced myself to return. The box was exactly where I left it. The towel was still in place. I lifted it just enough to peek inside. The dolls were in the same positions. Their dresses were still damp in spots, so I left the towel off to help them dry. The pressure in my ears flared up again, and I felt a slight ringing. I gritted my teeth and tried to ignore it. I decided to just take some photos for a quick listing. I set up a black backdrop, placed a single light source, and arranged the dolls in a row. My hands kept shaking, so the first few shots were blurry. I kept hearing that low buzz in my ear. Every time I touched one of the dolls to reposition it, I heard that faint murmur or whisper. My heart pounded. My eyes darted around, looking for where the sound was coming from. I couldn't figure it out. I got a decent set of pictures in about 15 minutes. The whole time, sweat dripped down my back. My arms felt cold, even though the rest of me felt like I was burning up. I snapped maybe 20 shots total, then turned off the light and walked back to my computer. I uploaded the photos, typed out a quick description, and left the price open to offers. I didn't want to hold on to them any longer. Before I left the studio for the evening, I decided to place the box of dolls in a closet. I carry a small flashlight on my keychain. It was pretty dark in the closet, so I used the flashlight to see what I was doing. The second I set the box down, I heard what I swear was a hiss. It was short and soft, like air escaping a valve. I spun around, shining the flashlight in every corner. No one was there. My heart hammered in my chest. I felt a lump in my throat. I pushed the box further inside, shut the door, and backed away. I stood there, breathing hard until I felt a pulse throbbing in my ears. Then I locked up the studio and left. That was yesterday. Now I'm sitting here finishing up this account of what happened. My flu symptoms are still there, but they've lessened. The pressure in my ears is still noticeable, especially when I think about the dolls. I'm waiting to see if anyone will buy them. I'm prepared to throw them out if it comes to that. I don't care if they might be worth something. I don't like the sounds I've heard or the sensations I've felt around them. I've never been a believer in any kind of supernatural stuff. Right now, I just want to be healthy and get back to my normal life. I'm aware that I could be imagining things. I haven't tried to analyze it deeply. I just know I don't want those dolls near me anymore. That's my plan anyway. Sell them or get rid of them. If I have another night of hearing those whispers, I might just toss the whole box in the trash and leave it on the curb. I don't need this kind of trouble in my studio. I just want to breathe normally again and stop feeling that creepiness crawling up my neck. If someone else wants them, they can have them. Otherwise, they're gone. I'm done. I remember the day my sister-in-law walked into our living room holding that porcelain doll. She said it was some kind of rare collectible, and she thought it would look good by the couch. It was as tall as my waist. It had blue glass eyes, pale cheeks, and long blonde hair. It wore a frilly white dress with lace around the edges. My wife thanked her right away, but I stood there, feeling a strange discomfort. Something about that doll's blank stare bothered me. I didn't say anything at first. I helped my sister-in-law place the doll on a small wooden chair in the corner of our living room. She propped it up so it looked like it was sitting there, watching the room. I noticed the doll's eyes never seemed to catch the light right, but I shrugged it off. It was just a new decoration. I tried not to overthink it. Later that night, I was sitting on the couch with my wife, watching TV. I kept glancing at the doll. I felt like it was staring straight at me, though I knew that wasn't possible. I told myself it was just porcelain and glass. It wasn't going to move, but it gave me chills. My wife noticed me shifting uncomfortably, so she asked if I was okay. I said yes. I didn't want to sound crazy or ungrateful. I just told her it looked a little eerie, but we'd get used to it. The first morning I noticed something odd. I was heading to the kitchen for coffee. The doll's chair is near the front window. Usually the doll faces toward the couch, but that morning it looked like the doll's torso was leaned forward, closer to the edge of the chair. It also seemed turned more toward the hallway. I thought maybe my wife had bumped it when she walked by. I straightened it, then made my coffee. I didn't say anything to my wife because I figured it was nothing. We both had busy schedules, so I assumed either of us might have accidentally nudged it. A few days later, I got home from work. I dropped my keys on the table by the door and looked into the living room. The doll's head seemed tilted to the side, almost like it was looking at the door. The angle was different from how we left it in the morning. I called out to my wife and asked if she had moved the doll. She said she hadn't touched it. She was in the kitchen, opening some groceries, and she just shrugged. I felt a pinch of unease, but I tried to ignore it. That night after dinner, we sat down to watch some news. I kept glancing at the doll. It stayed in place. I watched until bedtime. Nothing happened. The next morning, I woke up and checked on the doll. It was tilted forward again. This time, the left arm was almost on the seat of the chair. It looked like it was sliding off. I felt a wave of nervousness in my chest. I stood there, staring, my heart pounding. I felt silly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was moving on its own. I gently pushed it back into a normal sitting position. I looked for any loose joints or broken piece that might be causing the tilt. Everything felt normal. The porcelain was intact. The dress was still neat. I decided to bring it up to my wife again. She listened but didn't seem too alarmed. She suggested maybe the doll wasn't balanced well. The chair had a slightly uneven leg. She said we could secure it or maybe store the doll in a cabinet if it kept sliding. I nodded, but I didn't want to upset my sister-in-law by hiding the doll. So we left it there. Over the next week, the doll kept shifting positions. Sometimes it tilted forward, sometimes it slumped to the side. A few times it looked like it had slid a couple of inches toward the edge of the chair. I tried to investigate. I checked the floor for vibrations. I checked the chair legs. Nothing seemed wrong enough to explain the movement. The living room floor is level and the chair isn't rickety. I started feeling jumpy. Every night before bed, I'd double-check the doll's position. Then in the morning, I'd find it shifted again. I began to worry that I was losing my mind or that there was something else going on. After several nights of this, I decided to set up a small security camera in the living room. I bought a cheap one online and installed it near the TV, pointing toward the doll. I told my wife I just wanted proof that we weren't bumping into it, or that there wasn't an open window causing a draft. She thought I was overreacting, but she let me do it. I felt a sense of relief once the camera was in place. I thought I'd finally catch the moment when the doll moved. For the first 2 nights, I checked the recordings in the morning. The footage showed me walking around, my wife passing by, and nothing else. But each morning, the doll was still out of place. One morning, the doll's head was so far forward I was sure I'd see it on camera. But when I reviewed the video, there was nothing. The doll never moved, at least not on the footage. I watched the entire night speed scanning through the timeline, and the doll stayed in the same spot. It was confusing and frustrating. I felt my hands shake as I fast-forwarded and rewound, trying to find a glitch or a sudden skip. The camera worked fine. It was just impossible. The doll was in the normal position all night on video, yet in the morning it was tilted. I tried a different approach. I set up my laptop to record as well, from another angle. I wanted 2 sources of video. I positioned the laptop on a small table on the other side of the room. I made sure it had enough battery. That night, I stayed up later than usual, watching a movie in the living room with the lights low. I kept looking at the doll from the corner of my eye. It didn't budge. After the movie, I turned everything off and went to bed, leaving both cameras recording. The next morning, the doll's right arm was resting on its lap, something it hadn't done before. I felt my heart thump hard. I turned off the cameras and rushed to check the recordings. Once again, I saw nothing unusual. The doll remained still for hours. The only movements were me heading to bed and my wife walking to the bathroom. The timestamps matched. No cuts or jumps. I felt sweat on my forehead. My mouth was dry. I replayed the moment around 3 a.m., then 4 a.m., then 5 a.m. The doll didn't move. I started feeling my skin crawl. I had no explanation. At work, I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about that doll in my living room. I wondered if I should just throw it in a closet. But I worried my sister-in-law would ask about it or want to see it. She was proud of that gift. I didn't want to hurt her feelings. Plus, part of me didn't want to anger whatever was happening. I'm not superstitious, but the situation felt weird. I started scanning online forums about porcelain dolls moving on their own. I found a bunch of stories, but most sounded fake or involved things I couldn't verify. A few suggested temperature changes or subtle house shifts could cause slight movements, but none of that seemed to explain why the camera never caught anything. One evening, I decided to stay up all night in the living room. I wanted to witness the movement firsthand. My wife thought I was losing it, but she agreed to go to bed and let me do my experiment. I turned off the TV around midnight, leaving just a lamp on. I sat in a recliner across from the doll. I tried to keep my eyes on it. Around 1 a.m., I started to feel restless. I got up, walked around, sipped some water. I kept checking the doll. It didn't move. By 2 a.m., my eyes felt heavy, and my head was throbbing from lack of sleep. I decided to focus on the doll and ignore everything else. I sat there, fighting the urge to doze off. My back hurt, and the quiet got under my skin. At about 3:15 a.m., I had to blink a few times to clear my vision. The doll looked the same. I reached for my phone to check the time. When I glanced back up, I thought I saw its head tilted an inch forward. I froze. My heart pounded. I stared, trying to see if it was just my imagination. It stayed still. I stood up slowly and walked over to it. I felt goosebumps on my arms. I could see the doll's head was now lower than before. I touched the back of its head. It felt cool and solid, no sign of any trick mechanism. I slowly eased the head upright again. Then I stepped back, half expecting it to tilt back down in front of me. It didn't budge. I sat down, feeling a rush of adrenaline. I wanted to keep my eyes on it the entire time, but I had to blink. I had to shift in my seat. I tried not to look away for more than a second or two. By 4 a.m. I was so exhausted that I started nodding off. My eyelids felt like they weighed a ton. I forced myself up to walk around, but I still ended up drifting in and out. By 5 a.m., I realized I had dozed off for a solid 10 minutes. When I checked the doll, its right arm was bent forward again. It was the same position I had found it in a few days before. My stomach clenched. I knew it had changed position in that short time. I hadn't been asleep long, but long enough for something to happen. I felt shaky and short of breath. When my wife came out around 7 a.m., I was still sitting there feeling tense and drained. She noticed the doll's new position. I told her it moved while I slept. She gave me a worried look like she thought I was cracking up. I convinced her to watch the new footage with me. Once again, the video showed nothing. The doll didn't move the entire night. Yet there it was, arm forward. I became paranoid. I started closing the living room door whenever I left the room. I didn't like walking by and seeing that figure on the chair. I couldn't stand the blank stare. Every time I looked into those glass eyes, I felt my chest tighten. I tried rearranging the doll differently on the chair. I even tied a piece of clear fishing line around its waist, anchoring it to the chair's back. I thought maybe I could catch it or at least stop it from shifting. The next day, the fishing line was loose. The knot I had tied around the chair's back was still there, but the loop around the doll was gone. It lay on the seat, coiled up. I felt my stomach drop. My wife finally agreed that something strange was happening. She said she wanted to talk to her sister about where the doll came from. She made that call in the afternoon. I hovered near her, listening. Apparently, my sister-in-law bought it at an estate sale from an older woman. The woman claimed it was from her own mother's collection. That was all the information she had. My sister-in-law said it cost her next to nothing because the woman just wanted to get rid of it. That detail made me feel uneasy. I thought about throwing it out, but I worried about disrespecting my sister-in-law's gift. Besides, I had no proof of anything supernatural or bizarre. All I had was video that showed no movement, and yet the doll clearly kept shifting. I started to avoid being alone in the living room. At night, I locked the living room door from the inside before heading to the bedroom, hoping that might help me sleep. Eventually, I talked my wife into moving the doll into the closet in our spare room. I told her we could say we were redecorating. We did it in the late afternoon. I picked it up off the chair, expecting it to feel heavier. It was about the weight of a large porcelain figure, maybe a bit more. I felt uneasy carrying it. Its eyes stared up at me. I tried not to look at them. We placed it carefully on the floor of the closet, propped against the wall. I closed the door. That night, I slept better than I had in days. The next morning, I checked the closet. The doll was still there, in the position we left it. No tilt, no movement. I felt a wave of relief. My wife said maybe the problem was that it was balanced poorly on the chair and the small shifts in the house made it move. I wasn't fully convinced, but at least it wasn't creeping me out in the living room anymore. Over the next week, I kept checking the closet once a day. The doll never moved. I kept the cameras in the living room, but I didn't bother installing one in the spare room. I just wanted my normal life back. I didn't want to deal with more unexplained stuff. My sister-in-law hasn't asked about the doll yet, and I haven't volunteered any updates. We haven't gotten rid of it, but it's out of sight. I still feel nervous sometimes, especially when I pass the spare room door. I guess I'm half expecting to open the door one day and see the doll sitting on something else, or standing up or leaning forward. So far, that hasn't happened. But I can't forget the feeling of seeing that porcelain figure moved every morning. I can't forget the sinking feeling when I rewound the footage and saw it remain still on camera, while reality told me something else was going on. I don't have a tidy explanation, but for now, it's enough that the doll is tucked away. I try to ignore the occasional feeling that it might be staring through the closet door. I keep telling myself it's just an old porcelain piece, nothing more. And as long as it stays in that closet, I can at least pretend this whole thing never happened. But every once in a while, when the house is quiet, I think I hear a subtle scraping sound from that spare room. When I check, there's nothing there. The doll is in place, and the door is closed. I walk away and try to forget it again,